You still get to Zoom?
We still get to Zoom.
Zoom, zoom, zoom.
People feel like we figured it out.
No, they haven't.
Do we need to be on both cameras?
Recording in progress.
Now we're live.
Good evening, and welcome to the April 30th, 2025 Yarmouth Planning Board meeting. I am Joanne Crowley, Chair. The public is always welcome to attend in person or via alternative public access provided on the Town of Yarmouth website. Our meetings are generally held on the first and third Mondays of the month, but additional meetings like tonight are added when needed. I will begin by taking roll call this evening. Susan Britta.
Here.
Deirdre Gaquin.
Here.
Will Rubenstein.
Hello.
Jim Saban.
Present.
Peter Slovak. Ken Smith.
Here.
Joanne Crowley, present.
Madam Chair, just a moment of correction. We meet on Wednesdays, not Mondays.
I'm sorry.
Yes, yeah.
That was a test.
Wednesdays. I haven't.
He wants to
I
make
have it
sure we're
written
paying
here.
attention.
I have it written here as Wednesdays.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was like, I'm not coming back on Monday. So.
Oh, my God. Too many meetings this week. Sorry about that. We meet on Wednesdays, first and third. Seeing we have a quorum present, I will now call the meeting to order and ask that we join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
With liberty and justice for all.
That's another thing we didn't do last time.
We did.
So we have one main item on our agenda this evening. Kathy, our town planner, will review the materials in our packets and some additional information she provided to us today related to the benchmarking work provided by our consultants, BSC Group. I see that Jeff is here joining us. The mixed-use analysis being conducted by Union Studios. Kathy and I attended a meeting on Monday. No, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
I don't know my days of the week anymore. Also, LCP key issues and action items. We have a draft 3 that Kathy has prepared for us, and our a discussion on our presentation for next week's Board of Select Board update. So Kathy, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I think I'm going to probably turn it right over initially to Jeff, as you all have sent electronically, because there was a lot of good links in there as well. But you have hard copies of the benchmarking, the mixed-use benchmarking that BSC Group helped us with. And so maybe if he could go over, and maybe you can share his screen as well, and go over the different benchmarking of the various 8 of the small, medium, and large that were identified. I don't know, Liam, if he needs any permissions to share his screen.
I actually just got those permissions.
All right, awesome.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. As you know, I'm Jeff Bagg. I'm with the BSC Group. I'm a senior planner there, and I've been working with you all on the LCP. And this is sort of an add-on, sort of an added element to the local comprehensive plan. We're excited to be part of that discussion. As Kathy said, before I start getting lost in my screen share and talk through a couple of these examples that we found, I did want to just touch on the scope. Our scope is really comprised of 3 tasks, and I'm not sure if you guys have seen our scope, but our scope, task 1 is what we're doing kind of today. It's sort of it's benchmarking, so it's examples of successful projects, and that's what we were really trying to find, projects throughout Massachusetts that we could find online. So our project is kind of a detailed desktop investigation where projects have gone through permitting and then actually seen or gotten to construction phase, because we think that that's kind of an important element of success. There are quite a few projects that we kind of went through and found that, because we're doing a desktop only, they may have been built, but the information was not readily available online, and we see a lot of projects that get permitted and then for whatever reason don't actually happen. And so that was really important for us to be looking through. And then we're looking for information that's available in terms of planning board approvals, so we can gather written decisions, and then projects that have plans whether site plans or building plans available. That's really helpful for us to do this kind of benchmarking exercise. We did find quite a few with renderings, which is always great and helpful to visualize things. But what we're reviewing is photos, site plans, and trying to find where it's available financial data or other zoning incentives that made a project happen. And that's a little bit harder to find in some of these, but we did find some information. And then we're tasked with providing graphics, sort of photographs, renderings, and site plans, and a summary of the commercial and residential breakdown. So where we could find the number of units, we're trying to list that, square footage of buildings and things like that. And then it does include, if it's available or able to be found, a discussion of concerns, impediments, or challenges. And so in some cases, we're able to identify that through our desktop review. And the reason why I'm harping on this is because I know you're working on a separate project, and maybe Kathy can explain that, and maybe you've seen that, but for coming up with renderings and more detailed assessments, that'll be something it sounds like you'll be working with Union Studios and Horsley Witten on it. So that's great. Part two of our task, which we're not in, we're going to embark on this next, is sort of a review of regulatory constraints and looking at your village center zoning districts, and kind of balancing it with information about projects that you all have seen, whether it's you or your ZBA, get either reviewed or permitted, and try to identify regulatory constraints, infrastructure, or financial issues that may have been impeding some of those projects. And that's part two of our task, which we have not started, but we do have a kind of a base map of the Route 28 corridor, and we've been getting a lot of helpful information from Kathy in terms of projects that have been permitted. And we're hoping to we had talked about this as part of the LCP, we're hoping to kind of put together a map of Route 28 and show some of those projects, and kind of help illustrate how much activity there actually has or will be on Route 28. And then part of that regulatory task is looking at 40R. So the Commonwealth has a smart growth overlay district program, and we're going to look at that. And then finally is coordination and community input. So we'll be back to kind of talk about that, and we'll provide a report. But basically, really long-winded way to say that we're at task 1 of 3. And I just wanted to articulate that as we get going here. So as Kathy said, this should have been transmitted to you. So it's 8 projects that we're looking at, and we're trying to find examples that are small-ish, and there's a couple really important reasons for looking at small mixed use. They are what a lot of people desire, but they're often difficult to find good examples of, especially new construction. Medium scale, so these are ranging around 20 units or so, with some version of commercial retail space. And then we found two large scale examples that we think are important to talk about, but they're not very large. So we did not go to the scale of benchmarking something like Mashpee Commons. I know that came up as an example. But in looking at the size and scale of something like Mashpee, it's 140 acres, and it was developed over decades. And so we didn't do that assessment because we wanted to try to find things that were more recent and more relevant, I think, to the discussions, kind of looking at market conditions, especially things that survived COVID. So as I go through this, I'm happy to answer questions as I go, but I think if I can get through most of it, it might help. It kind of each one builds upon the next, but if I make a mistake or if there's a really important question you want to interrupt me, please feel free. So I don't know if all of you know that I was a municipal planning director in East Hampton for 6 years prior to my starting BSC Group. So I did look at 2 projects in East Hampton. The reason being that I was able to work with these developers through a couple of these projects, and I feel like it was informative and helpful to have kind of that hands-on knowledge to explain. But this is a property in downtown East Hampton. the reason why I looked at this one specifically is because if the picture along the top showed that it was a sort of an abandoned building, and it had been like that for about 10 years. And it was really sandwiched between two existing properties. And what we see a lot of in our work, and not only in East Hampton and elsewhere and in Yarmouth, is this idea of infill development. This property is tiny, so it's one of those 6,000 square foot lots. And there's a lot of history with carving up these small properties. So we wanted to showcase this one because it's a small lot. It's a small building footprint as well. 2,000 square feet is the footprint. Most of my numbers are based on footprint. But it was proposed as a 2-story mixed-use building. The first floor has this option for 2 retail spaces, but in the permitting process, it also allowed flexibility that in the case that they had one commercial tenant that wanted that 2,000 square foot area, it could be 1 space or 2. So they built in the flexibility. And then it's 2 2-bedroom apartments above, a small number of parking spaces. You can see the site plan on the left. And what I did throughout this, as Kathy said, as I put links in to the information, so you can get higher resolution photos and you can get the full plan sets. But 4 parking spaces for 2 apartments is pretty great to actually see happen. Although there are 8 off-site leased spaces, and then the picture is literally from the other day. So this is a project that was permitted in 2021, but started construction last year, and it's being put up as we speak. The noteworthy thing is that it is in the 40R district in East Hampton, but it didn't utilize that opportunity. It just went through standard zoning, did require some variances. So again, kind of in this small realm, this is a property in Westwood, and a lot of this is, a lot of the methodology is with desktop is I was really finding newspaper articles that were available online that talked about mixed use projects, and then finding the materials online. In this case, I did have to communicate with their planning department to get the updated information. But the building along the top, excuse me, is nothing special, the 1-story wonder, but it does represent what a lot of communities see as an existing building. And what was interesting about this is the original proposal sought to build a 2nd story up above this existing building. And what was uncovered through the permitting history and the decision and things like that is that they got permitted and approved, and then as they went into further due diligence, they actually found that the building was not structurally sound enough to support the 2nd story. And they went back for modification of the approval and the design plans. And what I was told is that the elevations and the lower left there pretty much stayed the same, but they were allowed to actually go in and demolish the building and reconstruct it new with the existing setbacks. But this is also this is a little bit larger property. It's 13,000 square feet, but the building size was important to look at. So finding these smallish buildings that are, this was 3,200 square feet as a footprint. And in this one, the 2nd story supports 5 1-bedroom apartments. In this case, it happens to be office space that the first use is slated for. But it was really important to find this example initially where they were building on top. That's a common theme that we see is people want to reuse the building. And then the decision has some details, and the building plans have kind of that arrangement of the office space. And then the site plan shows that they're looking at 18 parking spaces, and they kind of split it on both sides of the building. So this was a good example, I think, for small mixed use and kind of redeveloping an existing parcel. And then this one, I think someone chimed in, I think it was Peter maybe, and I had a Route 28A for some reason, but this is in Harwichport. And so this was a good Cape Cod example that we're able to find. And again, the reason why I found it is because the project is under construction. And so we're looking back at these to show that they achieved construction, because that means that they got all the financing they need, but it also permitted in 2022. This one, really struck struck me as a really great example for you guys to look at and maybe, have Union Studios look at, but basically it's along 28. It looked to fill a vacant parcel. And so this is all new construction. Property size is just about 30,000 square feet, so it's a little bit larger. And the building footprint size is 6,500 square feet. Similarly, this is only 5 units. Up above, they're 1-bedroom units. They're larger. But what is great about this one is it has sort of a larger restaurant kind of positioned within the building. So of the 6,500 square feet, 3,000 of that is pegged for a restaurant. They had talked about like a cafe, a smaller restaurant, that 850 square feet, and then 2 retail spaces. And so this is a great example. The architecture looks good. I was trying to find renderings of it, but I wasn't successful in getting good renderings for this one. But I think that they exist because some of the realtor sites are showing it. I did update this slightly from the version that you guys might have sent. I'm working off this one. It would be version 3. I did look back, and the property, the project has 38 parking spaces, and quite a few of them are off-site. And so I did amend the site plan to show that the developer got approval for that parking lot. And if you can see the site plan on the right side, on the left side of that, there's a separate building, and then a separate parking area. So they were able to secure additional parking off-site. But I think it's important because it fits in with kind of their village center overlay district. And again, the building plans and site plans are linked here. So switching to medium scale, I was not going to include this one initially because it's another East Hampton example, but I decided to include it because this was one of the only ones I could find that actually had secured an approval under the Smart Growth Overlay District requirements. So East Hampton has had it for quite a while. This was the first building built under that zoning. They approved it in 2009. And this was the first building that got built under the 40R regulations. You can see it was permitted in 2022, constructed in 2024. It's fully occupied except for one of the commercial spaces has been vacant. It's split up into 2 commercial spaces. But this was a dilapidated gas station. The service station had gone out of business, and then there on the picture on the bottom there was a liquor store. And so in this example, the developer worked really diligently to work through the process with it was DHCD at that time. Now it's Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities to get the affordable housing restrictions, and that was something that we're noting as a challenge. This developer was pretty small, owned a lot of properties, but hadn't really developed too much, and definitely identified that the additional costs to get all the legal paperwork in place and navigate the approvals was challenging. But the benefit for the city of East Hampton in this case was that there's 18 market rate units and 5 permanently affordable units, sort of right in the downtown area. And there is a commercial tenant in the first floor. And actually, just driving by, I live in East Hampton still. The additional tenant space is going to be filled with a tattoo parlor, and the tattoo parlor is actually moving from another location in town into this new space. So I think that one of the things that we are hearing about mixed use is it can be challenging to fill those commercial spaces. But I think with patience and kind of perseverance, it can be done. 34 parking spaces on site, and I think what's important about this one is it's a good example of a project that could be positioned on the corner of a street. And I know, through the LCP, there's a couple areas along Route 28 that have that characteristic where it's an intersection. And so looking at something like this to provide street frontage on 2 streets was really important to look at. And it's maybe not architecture for everybody. It may not fit in Yarmouth, but in East Hampton it fits. There was a lot of other brick buildings nearby, 2 and 3 story buildings, so it's pretty compatible. And it did say here, the city did get an incentive payment for this project. for some of you, as our next phase of the project, we'll talk about 40R in more detail. But if you were to create a 40R district, there is an initial payment that goes to the town. And it's usually pretty large sum of money, you know, $400,000 is an initial payment. And then every time a building permit is issued for new housing units within that area, the town is eligible for an incentive payment. It's $3,000 per unit. So as things start to get developed under 40R, there is that financial incentive. So moving to the town of Bedford, this one was one that BSC Group had worked on in terms of doing some of the civil work. But this is it's harder to see, I know, in the slides, but the location, the context map here shows the parcel in red, and it was really just used as a bus depot, and it was at a prime intersection where there had been some other activity, and so this was a key parcel that the town was really looking to have redeveloped. And then I think they were lucky to get a project that had this kind of 3-story mixed-use building, and then they incorporated a separate building that was intended to be a restaurant space. And so this one has some underground parking attached to it in the back, so it's a little bit more elaborate in terms of the way that they approached it. But again, the architecture is something where it's not just a box, and it has some elements that worked well. It was permitted with a special permit, but it was in their mixed use overlay district. So from what we could read in the decision, it was meeting the purpose that they had set out to establish in a mixed use district. The main building, the larger one, is 9,500 square feet in footprint. So just under 10,000 square feet footprint and 3 stories. And, you know, I think it's important to start to see some of the characteristics. So at that size, 10,000 square feet, they have 18 units in 2 floors. And then the commercial space, it is a fraction of that. So this building, in terms of mixed use of a 9,500 square foot building, the first floor mixed use is 1,700 square feet. The remainder of that is that parking and other areas. And so, again, the trend that we're starting to see is some of these mixed use buildings grow in size to accommodate the number of dwelling units, and seem to start to shrink the amount of commercial space that's available. And I'm hopeful that through your work with Union Studios and our second leg of our second task, that we start to drill down on what might be causing that to happen. But it is a trend that we do see a little bit of. I think that does it for this one. It's a larger site. It's about 38,000 square feet. Great. So 2 more, but this one, or 3 more. This one is in Nantucket. And so I think getting a Cape and Islands kind of example is really helpful for our discussions. I think architecturally, this one is appealing, but I think that is sort of in the eye of the beholder. But the renderings looked good. It's of a size and scale that looks appropriate, and that was something that we were really fond of, kind of trying to find these projects that would fit in Yarmouth without being too oversized. They're calling it New Downtown. There's a lot of information available about this one, except for the permit drawings and the permit approval are not online. I did email with their planning department, and I have PDFs of the information, but for the purposes of kind of getting this information to you guys tonight, I couldn't put the links in here, and I'm hopeful that by the end of our project we'll be able to get those uploaded somewhere onto a website and linked. But the story with this one is intriguing because they have a historic district commission, and it seems like what happened was the planning board approved or started to review a project, and then it went to that other commission, and they wanted this one building to be broken up into 2. And sounds pretty straightforward, but I think you probably know, but I think for a developer coming in with a design plan for one building, and then having to change it into two and pull them apart and revise all the plans and all the architecturals and all the site plans, that can be significant. But by doing that, they were able to secure all the approvals, and this one started construction also recently. The picture at the top is of an existing restaurant that it sounded like from the discussions that they had an agreement to relocate that restaurant into the new building. But the demolition started, I think, within the past 2 weeks. And so this is a sort of a live project. And again, these are really important because it means that the developer was able to secure all the financing for the project. And that was really critical for us to be looking at. So the details, it's 1.5 acres. So we're getting a little bit larger in terms of the acreage. The building size, that main building, just under 12,000 square feet. So the second building, 5,500 square feet. And I think they were able to make the site plan work. Most if not all the parking's behind the building, and it really creates that street frontage, which everyone's looking for with a mixed-use building, is push the building up to the street. This is about 3,600 square feet of commercial space. So, I think we're looking at the comparable numbers. If you're at 16,000 square feet of building, they're down to about 3,500 square feet of commercial. And so there's that ratio that we're starting to see. 85 parking spaces, also in a mixed-use overlay district. This one's exciting because it's actually happening.
Jeff, if you, I can,
Yes.
this entire project, this is 3 stories, so they're roughly 40,000 square feet gross building area.
Sure, yes, that's a great way to put it. If you're looking at gross building area, yeah.
And their commercial space, that entire building on the right side is commercial. There's an 8-lane bowling alley on the right side. So so the commercial space is going to be probably closer to 15,000 square feet.
Okay, that's good to know, and I'll look at that and refine these numbers. It sounds like you're familiar with it. I think that's great. I'll sharpen my pencil on that one. But it is good. It's coastal town with a lot of the same, unique characteristics that you guys have. Great. So now there's two more larger scale ones. This is Islington Center in Westwood. This project, has 3.5 acres in total. It's a couple parcels. It's a couple different properties. They're dispersed across the street. But I think what was really important to highlight with this one is that this was a pretty good example of a public-private partnership. In this case, the town owned 4 properties, and one of the adjacent property owners owned 4 other properties. And so this was a very long sort of RFP process that the town engaged in to secure a developer, then to work through the design plans that benefited the developer and benefited the town. This one has an anchor institution, so negotiating with a corporation like CVS takes that due diligence and that time and that patience. But this does factor in a CVS that was temporarily offline and then relocated into a new building. The image on the upper right was a church. And so they were able to preserve sort of that facade of the church, the steeple and the pillars in the front, and then add and renovate off to the side in the back of that. This was seemingly very complicated and a very long process. The town's RFP in the page that's embedded here in the link has a great resource, kind of a catalog of the steps that we're taking. And I think whether or not this is totally applicable to Route 28, it does share some potential resemblances to the Manikes property, where the disposition process occurred. It had the town meeting votes, and then there was a long process to go through this land development agreement with the developer to actually get this outcome. But it's 18 units, and in this case, they utilized off-site affordable housing units to meet their requirements, their inclusionary zoning requirements. And so that's something that I honestly don't know if that's something that's available in Yarmouth, but I think providing the units off-site was beneficial in this case. It allowed the developer to actually provide them rather than trying to avoid that. lots of parking, special permit, and this one was quite a few years in the making. So looking at, you know, an RFP process that started in 2015, planning an RFP that started in 2015. A permit was issued in 2018, and then the project was completed in 2023. And so, the last one is in Amherst. I know that Yarmouth's not a college town, but this one I thought was important to highlight. It's a little over 5 acres of sort of leased space. It sits within a larger parcel, but 5 acres was sort of a sweet spot that I continued to find that there were a couple projects that fit within 5 acres. It's much harder to find projects that fit, you know, between 5 and 10 acres. It's something that we're going to touch on in our regulatory review, but I think the village center zoning that the town has, you know, really took a liberal view of people's properties and really amassed large parcels or many small parcels into one large parcel. And we're seeing that as a potential constraint. You know, it's very difficult for a developer to amass multiple individual parcels, especially beyond kind of 2 or 3. But I won't belabor that. That kind of comes in our next phase. But here, you know, this is a real mixed use sort of village feel. In the rendering up on the top, BSC Group actually was involved in this project as well. This was quite a few years ago. But the rendering along the top shows in the red barn. It was a Atkins food store that got developed first. And then a lot of the site planning work looked to be compatible with that as an amenity. And these are kind of 2 pretty large buildings. Building A and Building B are shown, again, footprint, but you know, we're talking 28,000 square feet and 26,000 square feet of footprint. But if you're looking, again, at the sort of the top image, the top rendering, you can see the commercial retail spaces are in orange awnings. And then if you look at the image on the bottom left, it's an actual photograph of this place developed. It's the right side of the building, faces along Coles Road, and actually creates a street frontage that turns into the property. They've been very successful in getting tenants. And I think what we would say is that it's been a challenge for the owner developer to get the tenants, but they've been persistent and they're occupied with a mix of uses on some art galleries and some retail, and it is existing and vibrant and occupied. And so the number of units is 130. So we're up at that larger number of units. 104 market rate and 26 affordable. And I think that's my other note here is that this was a comprehensive permit, a 40B, friendly 40B. And I know that, you know, talking to the town of Amherst, they did find that it's a little challenging for 40B to incorporate residential and commercial. That sort of split of uses in a 40B is tricky, challenging. They worked with Beacon Communities to develop this parcel. And then this is another good example of how the town utilized the project to get MassWorks grant. And then obviously it being a 40B, they were eligible for affordable housing tax credits. And then the town did set up a tax increment financing program for this to really kind of push it over the edge and finalize the financial package. But this is an example that I think is great because it exists and has been really successful. What you can't see, if you're looking at the actual image in the bottom left, is to the right across the street is a smaller mixed-use building that was built previous to this. And so both sides of Coles Road has this mixed-use building feel. And then they were able to kind of create that campus feel within the site. So I think with that, I'm going to stop and answer questions if you all have any. But I think that kind of is our look at kind of benchmarking to kind of set the stage. We're hopeful that our work informs the planning board and Union Studios and Horsley Witten. But I think you have another step with them to articulate certain things, and maybe I'll let Kathy speak to their scope. But we were kind of tasked with kind of coming up with these examples, and I'll stop. Thanks.
I have more to talk about later, but maybe if you guys want to talk.
Any questions?
I just had one, and it's more of a practical question. How did the off-site parking work? How did that all come together? How did you identify the sites? Was it part of the plan? Several of these had off-site parking. They met the requirement by having some on-site. How does that off-site parking work? Does the developer identify the parking, or how does that?
Yeah, in the case, it was the Nantucket example. Oh, let's see, which one was it?
I think there were two.
Harwich.
Harwich, yes,
They have a
thanks.
public parking area across the street, so I think
Right.
they may be able to consider some of that.
Yeah, like, on the Harwich, there's 38 on-site, but 18 off-site.
Yeah, I'll double check. What I'm assuming happened is either the developer owned that parcel or acquired it
Okay,
and then negotiated, the agreements. But I can look at that a little bit more carefully and make sure that it's clearer how they did that. But I think that one, in that case, that was the developer.
okay.
Whoever spoke said another one has public parking, and I agree with that. There are a couple examples where there's a little bit of on-street parking, but other than that, I think that would be a developer negotiated piece. But I will dive back into that one along with checking the square footage of the Nantucket project.
Okay, thank you.
Susan, I'd assume it would be similar to the negotiations that they did to put the gas station across from Stop and Shop on Station Avenue. They had to purchase a separate piece of property for mitigation. So I'm assuming that might be the avenue for,
Template that they used.
for mitigation. I need 18 parking spots. Well, all right, well, I'll buy that piece of property over there. Will that make you happy? I work something like that.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
I just-
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, Jeff, just a couple questions.
Sure.
This is Ken Smith. The only example, just so I get it straight, that was a public-private partnership was the Westwood project, is that correct?
I definitely just described it that way, but I do think that project in Amherst would represent a public-private partnership. And again, in full disclosure, prior to all of my work in East Hampton and elsewhere, I worked in Amherst. I wasn't there for the permitting of that project,
Okay,
but the relationship to go through that process of a friendly 40B and then to secure the mass works and then to get the tax increment financing, I would describe that as a public-private.
that's where I was going with my
Partnership as well,
questioning,
yeah.
so. And I guess just one follow-up, you have 8 project examples, and they're great examples. Are all of them on town sewage, do you know, or, where that stands within these projects?
No, that's a great question. I did not specifically look for that.
Okay.
I think that's part of a desktop review. I think I should be able to find that pretty quickly, and I do think that would be relevant. I think that's something that we were definitely going to look at in terms of the regulatory constraints, our task 2. We were going to look at how that might be impacting the projects in Route 28. So I'm happy to go back and take a look and kind of make a note where I can find the information. But I'm not sure about the Harwichport one. I'm not sure if they would have town sewer. I think, and Nantucket's another great question. I'm not sure how those municipalities are set up. I think-
Nantucket, the business district is fully sewered, so I can't answer for Harwich, though. But I think it's relevant in the size and scope of some of the lots that we're talking about on Route 28, so.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I know that was one of the things that I was going to discuss with the board in our next task is looking at Great Island Plaza.
Yep.
It's one of the projects that we're looking at, the regulatory part of that and wondering if maybe one of the reasons they are waiting is to wait for the sewer. And maybe you all know that, but it seemed like something that could have potentially been a factor there.
Sure. Great job in your research, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Peter?
I think these examples are great, but did the selection consider, or will it consider, maybe the demographics and economics of an area and how the the economics of certain area, the property values of certain areas are going to support some of your examples, whereas maybe they're not so supportable in Yarmouth?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I mean, the Nantucket one, the land probably cost them around $10, $11 million just for the land.
Right.
So,
Yeah. The quick and honest answer is no, we did not do that as part of our benchmarking analysis. I think maybe asking Kathy, I think a quick discussion about the scope for Union Studios and what they're going to look at might be relevant, because I think I actually, because our scope is pretty narrow, and I had to keep myself on track to stay focused on kind of this desktop review of kind of the approvals and site plans, and not so much that the demographic evaluation. I don't know. Maybe I would defer to Kathy, but I don't know if she would want to answer that or not. But
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think what BSC Group was trying to do is come up with some examples of things that look or kind of feel or are the size that might fit in the town of Yarmouth. And one of the things that Union Studios is going to be doing is working with the town to look at financial feasibility assessment. So I think we're going to be meeting with the Cape Cod Chamber and kind of meet with they have a development group that meets, I think, every month, and we're going to see if we can't get in touch with them and have some questions and ask them, because that's the whole thing about what's the viability. I mean, I think Jeff did identify some really good issues. It's hard to fill in the commercial space. There might be certain things with when you're financing it, maybe some of the banks are saying, well, we don't know how commercial and retail's doing here in Yarmouth, so we want you to be able to make the numbers work just on the residential and not take into consideration the commercial, which then makes the numbers much more difficult to work through. So we're going to try and identify that in the next phase with Union Studios in this feasibility assessment.
do you know if any of the projects sold after being permitted? Were they, and so they were developed by somebody other than the initial group that permitted the project?
That's also a good question. I didn't look at that. I'm thumbing through my slides, and I can double check that. I think based on the research that I have, I think the answer is no. But I want to double check that. I think there's a couple of them that I'm not 100% sure, but the East Hampton ones, I've understood that the owner has been the developer and remains the owner. The Harwichport one, I would want to do a little bit of diving, a little bit more. I think I can find that information in terms of the permitting path, but I know Amherst is the same. The Islington Center stayed the same developer. They're a developer and landlord, and I think that's something that Kathy was kind of just touching on. Some of this stuff is whether they're developers, and do they have the experience and expertise to then become landlords, not just for residential but also the commercial component. And so that's something I think we're going to try to touch on as we keep going forward, and hopefully combine between us and Union Studios. I think that's an issue to be cognizant of, is that some developers are, very familiar with developing housing, and I think adding the commercial tenant mix in there, and the way the financing can be different for that, I think the developers have to be knowledgeable about that. And then there's the whole bank issue, and whether I think banks treat them slightly different as well. So, long-winded way to say, I'll go back and double check if I can find that information, but I think it's a good question. There was another project I was scoping in Dennisport, on Main Street. It's a nice looking project, and I'm happy to share. I looked at about 40 projects, and I kind of continued to winnow them down to these 8 that were kind of the most representative and most informative. There is a project, it's 626 Main Street in Dennisport, and it does seem like it was permitted and then sold. And my understanding is that it wasn't clear to me 100% whether construction has started, but that was 24 units and about 700 square feet of retail. But it was something I did scope. I just didn't continue to pursue it because I couldn't find all the available information.
Yeah, Jeff, I do have knowledge of the Railroad Ave project in Bedford. I actually have family members that were involved in it, and it was permitted, and then the project was sold off.
Okay, great.
I think one of the things that we keep talking about, and I think when we generally think of mixed use, we think of commercial on the first floor and top of shop. But that doesn't mean that the site can't be mixed use. I think
Right.
that was what they were originally looking at the Cavalier when they had a project that included commercial and also included the Bass River Motel, where they had a bunch of residential in separate buildings and the commercial in another building, and then they were going to condominiumize it so that they could have different developers and different financing packages for the two. So I think one of the things that we talked with Union Studios about was maybe in some of their renderings, maybe it's not just a mixed-use building, but maybe looking at some examples of renderings related to mixed-use sites. And it might be in separate buildings. Because once you start having mixed use, you're talking sprinkler systems and those types of things that add costs to projects. And maybe keeping them in separate buildings might be harder. But a lot of times the commercial, they're trying to keep that somewhat smaller. So you don't want to have this small, tiny little building in the front and a large, big residential in the back. So, but something to think about. It may not necessarily be top of shop.
Madam Chair?
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick question?
Yes. Mr. Rubenstein?
I kept thinking Jeff, thank you for all this research. I kept thinking as we looked at all these projects, I kept thinking about the Cape Cod Commission of it all. And so what I'm trying to remember is the 10,000 square foot trigger residential? Is it commercial? Is it combined? And
Either
someone
or.
can quickly clarify that, and then I have a follow-up question.
If it's residential alone, it's more than 29 units. So if you had 30 units and we're not located in our growth incentive zone, which is the 35 motels. But if it's mixed use, it's 20,000 square foot gross. You do get some credit for different things that are on the site already. So, but I think that might be worth having more conversations with the commission with regard to that so that we can get a clearer understanding. Because I think a lot of these projects are actually smaller and are things that would not trigger the commission examples, and those might be infill, those might be projects that you can get the lot size together, or there might be some lots of that particular size to make it possible. Like, I do know that when we were originally putting the BCOD together, we were hoping that there would be some combination and combining of lots to have larger developments, and we really haven't seen too much of that at all.
Okay, well, I just feel like, given that we saw lots of projects that are off Cape, I do feel like we have to acknowledge that if it's going to be on Cape, we have to account for the Cape Cod Commission, which, unless I'm misunderstood, is pretty unique in the Commonwealth. Right? There aren't another, Jeff, you can tell me, are there other regional entities of its kind that like to do the kind of, let's just say, good work that the Cape Cod Commission does?
No.
Correct. No, I don't think
Right.
there's not another area that has that.
I just think if we're going through this whole process, we need to keep in mind, if we're showing, it might even be, and again, I'm not trying to make more work for anybody. It's the last thing I'm trying to do. But we have to acknowledge that if it's a great project in East Hampton, it's going to have this much more time, money, cost, and hoops to jump through if it's in Yarmouth. Like, we have to remember what the apples are to make sure that we're comparing it to apples. So I don't want to beat the Cape Cod Commission horse to dead, but we can't ignore it. So I hope we have a way of acknowledging it or including it as we keep thinking about this process going forward. Thank you.
Other regulatory requirements, that's a very good point, Will. Besides the commission, I mean, you have MEPA. I mean, I do know that the other project I was talking about there, where they were going to, at the Cavalier, I think that hit an automatic environmental impact report, and they decided they didn't want to go through that, even though they might have been able to get away with not having to go through the commission, because that is one of the GIZ properties, as well as the Bass River Motel. That was another trigger, another regulatory trigger in a process that can be very time-consuming, and that, I think, ended up being part of the reason they didn't move forward.
But Kathy, I don't know if this is possible, but it's those kinds of conversations when you're talking about public-private partnerships. It's like, does the town want to lose a project because a company doesn't want to go through MEPA, right? So like, the question is there a conversation to be had? Or does the town want to lose a project because the developer doesn't want to go through the Cape Cod Commission? So I don't know. I know I'm a little bit daylighting here a little, but I still feel like the whole issue of regulatory bodies that are unique to the Cape need to be accounted for in our work. Thank you.
We are hoping to identify all the constraints to mixed use, and that's certainly one of them.
Correct. Yeah, that's definitely, we'll get acknowledged in our next phase. We were trying to be adaptive to how the town wants to structure this. We put the benchmarking first. I think initially we had the regulatory constraints lined up first, but we kind of switched them around a little bit to kind of get this going first. But I think that's a good question.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Saban?
So my colleague Will spoke the words that were in my head before I was going to speak, and he did. I think we're burying the lead with all this, all great information, but what I keep hearing is the biggest detriment to any development is the regulatory issues. And until we can figure out how to make the regulatory issues more palatable to developers, it doesn't matter what we do. I mean, everything I've heard here is like permitted here, and then 5 years later, they're actually putting a shovel to the ground. Well, that 5 years costs money, and every time they have to, I feel bad for the guys in Nantucket. They had to basically go back to the drawing board and start all over again. I've had it happen to me on a project as simple as, landscaping my yard, and, those guys that get the pencils on the paper charge for that stuff too. So that regulatory stuff is what's really going to make it difficult to create any of these types of things until we can find ways to simplify it and provide incentives. I saw one place that's $65,000 tax incentive. So unless we can find ways to make it palatable for them to get through that regulatory, this is just all fun and games, because nobody's going to be able to do it if it takes them 3 to 5 years just to get through the regulations.
I do know that the Cape Cod Commission is doing their regional policy plan update, and one of the things that they are looking at is whether they can adjust some of their thresholds. I've always thought that the way the commission is work is you're actually getting the types of developments that you don't want. So if you have 3 lots and you can put a 9,900 square foot commercial building here, same thing here, same thing here, how about combining those and being able to do a 28,000 square foot building that looks so much better, has the parking in the back, has access management, all the types of things that we like to see, but literally would have the same amount of impacts as these other individual projects that did not trigger a DRI. So there needs to be some thought and conversations with the commission on that. And I have a meeting with them next week to talk about activity centers, and I'll certainly bring that up at that time.
I mean,
Madam
evidence
Chair, can I follow up on what Mr. Saban just mentioned?
Certainly.
Please. Jim, isn't the other thing we could do, some of the work that we may need to do as a planning board, looking at our own regulations?
Yeah.
Over the next year to two, which is one of our goals, or one of our, so, for you and I and the planning board to wait for the Cape Cod Commission to make changes to their thresholds, well, I'll just leave that there. But we can certainly do some things perhaps in our own body with our own deliberations and our own research and our own hearings to try to make it more palatable from the town of Yarmouth perspective.
I would agree entirely. I think it's also something that the Economic Development Committee can start looking at is, tax incentives and financial incentives to encourage development. I think we all keep looking at Great Island and say, well, what do we got to do to get this thing done? And it just sits there, and maybe the answer is we've got to provide them with some incentives, either at this board or the ZBA or the town as a whole, but, that seems to be the biggest eyesore in town, and I don't have personal knowledge of anything getting done to try to move anything forward on it.
Well, and we're a year away from anything happening at Mattakese, right? So wouldn't it be nice if by a year from now's town meeting, there were some changes in place so that whatever the town decides to do with Mattakese, the next step won't be a step back when they start encountering the town of Yarmouth zoning regulations. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Could I ask a question? Could I ask a question too?
Certainly,
Because I
Jeff.
think, I apologize. I'm probably not supposed to ask you guys questions, but the timeline for the sewer improvements to actually be ready on Route 28? Is there I should know this, but is there an estimated time frame for that sewer to be available on Route 28? Because I think that's similar to what Will just said about Mattakese. I think that's been our understanding of kind of working through the LCP and working through even you guys looking at Route 28 is that there is a moment in time now to be assessing the situation so that if there are changes that can be made, it's also in time for that sewer improvement project to be ready for people to plan for that and hook up. So I think if someone knows that date or time frame, that would be helpful for me to know.
I believe I think the plant won't be done till 27.
That's right.
But nothing is going in the pipe, I would imagine, until early 28. That's
Jeff,
the way
you're right, Will. The plan is spring of 2028 to have the first stuff going through the pipe.
Okay.
And Jeff, just so you know, whatever phase two is gonna be, those discussions are gonna start happening as well.
Okay.
I'd say in the next 6 months, because that means a whole nother funding package to go along with the fun and games of the where it's gonna go.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Just as whether it's our regulatory review or your work with Union Studios, I think looking at that a little bit to understand how would a developer look at that date? When would they start putting together plans and go for permitting? Because we all know that permits expire. I don't know if you guys have been dealing with the the Permit Extension Act or anything, but to get a project permitted and you have 2 years. And then if you're not breaking ground, you have to renew it and go through that process. But I think understanding that timeline a little bit for how a developer would begin to assess a property, that I feel like you're generally in the sweet spot right now to be assessing the regulations, and then a developer might be looking ahead. I don't know if they're really looking ahead 4 years, but we're getting close to that time frame where people are probably starting to sharpen their pencils on what options might exist. Great. So I think, Kathy, I provided that information to you. I think it's ready to go to your next step. I think I can try to go back and update those final details, but I feel like it's generally complete enough to pass along if that was your next step.
Yes, I've already passed it along to
Okay, there you go.
Union Studios.
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. Jeff, there are projects that the town of Yarmouth has approved along 28 that are mixed use. Shovels may not be in the ground yet, but they've been approved plans. And is there some way we should be benchmarking those? I'm thinking of a long time ago, Great Island. You take a picture of what it looks like now and what the plan was and what the permitting was. You take a look at J-Mart, what it looks like now and what it looks like, proposed to look like in the future. You look at Becker's Liquors, which we have now some initial renderings of what it looks like now and what we hope it might look like in the future, and they're all mixed. And then we have the other one, I'm not going to remember the address, on 28, the one with Restaurant Associates in the bottom with the trucking.
The Johnny E property.
Yeah, Tasty Buffet.
Yeah. Also, good projects that the town has approved to go forward in some way. And the way in which you presented the benchmarking projects for out of town is really a great summary of what's happening. But they seem to be that these are projects that have moved forward and are done.
Yeah, that's a good question, Joanne. I mean, my understanding of our purpose was to look outside of Yarmouth for examples of projects that were successful.
I don't want to muck up the charge.
I mean, one thing that we had hoped to do as part of our task 2, which is the regulatory constraints, is look at those projects that were permitted, and whether it's quick and cursory or moderately detailed, try to look at those projects that got permitted and find out if there was something that prevented them from actually moving forward. I do have a map, of the 28 corridor that we're hoping to use as the base map for that next step. I'm looking at our scope, and it's not specifically listed in our scope right now, but we had imagined using the corridor map and then pulling out like bubbles, call outs for the projects that have been permitted, that you mentioned, kind of that enumeration of those projects, and then where it's applicable, discuss them briefly. So it's kind of this 2-part piece where I think if our project was bundled together, it would create a little bit more cohesive view for you guys. Our first task was this outside look. Then our second task is this inside look at the regulatory constraints. So I will do my best to try to incorporate the projects that you mentioned. Kathy has given us a lot of that information. And maybe just, with a map and drawing an arrow to where they are and a brief description of them, I can try to work that in. I think it fits within our task 2. But I apologize if I misunderstood, but we were asked to kind of look outside of government for the examples that got to construction.
I think you did do what you were asked to do. And just to kind of clarify, we've asked both BSC Group and Union Studios to do a lot of work in a very short time period in order to be able to use the community planning grant before it expires on June 30th. So we're asking a lot, and we had to a little bit bifurcate the work because of procurement issues and all of these different types of things. So we were able to expand the existing contract that BSC Group by a certain amount to give them this work, and then we had to go out for a cost quote for the Union Studios work. So we're kind of patching it all together, and hopefully at the end we'll kind of get this good final product. And I think they did do a good job of identifying the benchmarking ideas, and I really appreciated that they are doing that extra mapping to kind of show where, and I know that you had talked about that, Joanne, as well, because a lot of people don't know what's going on in town and kind of see some of these other projects. I think some of the people that might be interesting to actually come as part of the panel discussions for the feasibility assessment would be to have the developer of the J-Mart, maybe Becker's and the Tasty Buffet, because they're people who came to us with these ideas, and how are they making it financially viable, and what could have been helped them, or what difficulties have they found in trying to move forward.
Okay. And the only other question I had, and this is, I know the benchmarking generally is meant to be kind of a 10,000-foot flyover of the property and how the site was developed. But all of these projects were right on the sidewalk. And I'm wondering how that might conflict with our basic zoning on setbacks, Kathy. And using these as examples, I don't think we allow them to build up to the sidewalk.
Well, in the Village Center Overlay District, there's a minimum and a maximum
Yeah,
setback.
right.
And I think it's like 16 to 25 feet, so or 15, to 25 feet.
Oh, that's pretty small.
So you can,
So it's not the 50.
no, they're 30.
No,
is
or
what's the
30, yep.
underlying- Yeah.
Yep,
So that, the whole intent was to move things closer in order
Yep.
to create more of a Main Street.
and the parking in the back.
Always in the back.
Parking on the
Yep,
side and in the
Yep,
back.
okay.
A big mistake we made in this, 80s and 90s was to make our bylaw say all parking must be in the front. And it took away the character of like you see going through downtown Dennisport or Howardsport now,
Right.
where those buildings are all out
Yeah.
close to the street. It gives you that sense of community and walking, et cetera. Where
Yeah.
we put all the parking up front, everybody else said, no, put it out back. So I think we're learning that, quite honestly, we made a mistake, in my opinion.
Yep, we required it to be in the front?
Yeah.
That's insane.
Well,
You're
I'm
not
just
the only one.
hoping,
You're not the only ones who did that.
Really? I thought that was just because there were no rules, not that we were requiring them to do it.
The whole thought process was to say that, well, see all the cars in front of this building, so there must be a good place to go into. I don't know what the mentality was, but
It's easy to pull into, because you see the
easy to pull
parking.
in, I don't know,
Easy to
but
pull into.
we did it for years, and I've
Mistake.
always wondered why. I just thought it's something we should fix.
okay,
So maybe if Jeff can still stay on, I just wanted to talk a little bit more. I think in some of the benchmarking, I know that one of the units got a little bit larger in size, like 30,000 square foot. That's a small scale. Maybe that really goes into the medium scale now. But small scales were very small, like 6,000 to 15,000 square feet. And then the medium ones were kind of like a half an acre to 1.6 acres. And then the large was like 3.5 to 5.3. What we're trying to have Union Studios do is, we're not picking any particular site on Route 28, because we don't want people to think that this is what's happening, or get people concerned or whatever. We're trying to come up with what it might look like with our existing zoning. So we're kind of looking at 3 hypothetical lots. And I guess my question to you guys, and we had talked, Joanne and I had talked a little bit about it, was what are the 3 kind of lot sizes that we might be looking at? I mean, do we really want to go with something smaller, like 1.5 acre site, a 2.5 acre site, and then maybe a 3.5 to 4 acre site, and not do anything with these extra large lots, which are very few and far between anyway? And then trying to, kind of come up with some different shapes of the lots, because we have a lot of long, narrow ones, so maybe that's one of the options. And then some of them are very short and stubby, and they go this way, just to kind of give an idea of what might actually be able to be done. So Union Studios is looking for a little bit of guidance on kind of what lot sizes.
Yeah, go ahead. We're looking for, like, how we
But
view
isn't there
small,
an
medium, and
industry
large.
standard? Doesn't the real estate industry have a standard as to what they define as a small lot, a medium-sized lot, and a large lot?
There's nothing standard on Route 28. Look, you know,
It's a hodgepodge.
Regardless of 28, it just is a benchmark to work in. There's nothing, so a small lot in Yarmouth might not be a small lot in Quincy. Is that what you're saying?
Because Quincy probably has 0 setbacks and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, 80%
So there's nothing we
coverage
could
and-
use as a sort of a jumping off point
I
to have a
think you gotta look at
discussion.
whatever our setbacks are, what the typical setback's gonna be in one of the VCOD zones, and look at our, I think it would be helpful to maybe look at some of the land that we have, and we know some of the owners that own multiple parcels, and possibly say, can we use your 3 parcels as an example? I don't
I think
know.
we're going to decide that. We're not going to ask anyone. I think we're just going to, we'll probably will pick lots, but we're going to kind of make them a little more generic, and make some assumptions on that. So looking, just to kind of get an idea is, we did look at different lots that we've hoped to combine in the past, and some lots that we know that are only 2 owners, and maybe that's something that could be worked together. And there was a lot of lots that were 2.5, 3 to 3.5 acres in size. We weren't getting any like 5 or 6 acre lots out of trying to reasonably combine lots that we thought might be a possibility. That's why I'm wondering, are we really talking more about like the infilling of, here's a blighted property, you know, what can we do to try and have a nice mixed-use building that would be a viable mixed-use building to infill here on some of the smaller lots that we have. We have a lot of 1 acre lots.
Right.
I mean, even like the recent project that we saw at 811 Route 28, which was the 8 townhouses. I mean, that was like about 1 acre, but it was like, it really worked well because they had a shared driveway. If you had to try and put that all on the one lot, and have a buffer and then the driveway, it would have been
Wouldn't have
very,
worked.
very
It
difficult.
wouldn't have worked,
It wouldn't
probably.
work. So I think you do need a certain size, so maybe, I don't think we want to start looking at something as small as, you know, half an acre or anything like that. I think we want to give a reasonable idea of what something might look like.
Yeah, I mean, I think your 1.5, 2.5, and 4.5 is reasonable.
You're 4.5?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, how many of those, if you look, just do a quick count if you can, how many of those lots along Route 28 are under 1 acre?
A lot.
Then maybe we want to look at something under 1 acre as well. Yeah.
The bigger problem is that the lot shapes, you know, there's so very few square lots. They're all such odd shapes that you could be 1.5 acres, but the usable, by the time you try to fit setbacks, you're gonna fit the same size building that you would on a half acre or 3/4 acre.
And there's also obviously a bunch of environmental resources on some areas in the
Right.
back. So you may have a larger parcel, but, you know, at least 1/3 of it is not developable. I think we might want to take that into consideration, trying to come up with lot sizes that might be like the developable portion of the site. And one of the other things we talked to Union Studios is that a lot of our properties butt right against a residential neighborhood. So what can you do in your design to help mitigate some of the impacts from that? You know, maybe you're going down in sizes and doing more smaller residential as you get closer to the back. The thing about doing something like a 4.5 acre, then you're probably doing something that's going to be triggering all these regulatory issues that Will was talking about, and that's less likely to actually happen. So I think, you know, if you're looking at, like Great Island Plaza there, I think that was like 2.7 acres of those three lots, kind of was that. And then if maybe there's like the Michael Coyne property where you had the VCOD project next to that, maybe that's another acre. So if you combine that, that might be like, okay, here's an example of how we might be able to combine up to 3.7. I don't think we're going to necessarily get all the way up to something as large as a 4.5 unless some serious combining starts happening.
Right.
I don't mean to throw a wrench into this because I know size here is what we're kind of looking for, but as Peter said, are there common sizes? You know, where all the hotels are that are either existing or going to be torn down, they're all long and narrow. We've got a bunch of long and narrow lots. and probably not very many square ones. But maybe, would it make, and I know we don't have a lot of time here, would it make sense to have some modeling about lot shape rather than necessarily size?
I think you just described them, Joanne. Most of the lots in 28 are either long and narrow or don't have any setback at all, and they're just long along the roadway, so.
You know, and I don't know how we,
I mean, we can look a little bit more closely, whoops, if you want to, whoops.
I mean, they're very rectangular.
You know, you have the post office, you know,
And those are three separate owners there at the post office?
I don't,
Post office is separate from Great Island, which is also separate from what was the,
this is
this
the
is
South
South
Yard
Yarmouth.
one.
But the dance school is.
Just trying
I
to
thought
give
they
you
were
an
in this-
idea. Here's a relatively even-shaped lot that's,
Oh,
you
okay,
know,
so yeah.
like, it's 100 and, yeah, so like 2.5 acres in size.
Oh, I was looking at the parking lot, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't have my right glasses on, and I think
South
it's
Yarmouth Post
Monday.
Office.
Obviously, the biggest lot on, you know, is about 18 acres if you just kind of take, you know, I'm sorry, this whole area with where
That's where
that's
Sports
where
World.
sports- But that's very distinct and very obvious, and that's a mega project. That's what we're referring to, like an extra, extra large lot, which is so rare. That's going to be very unique, and I don't think you're going to get a lot of things that are necessarily, you can always use, other than, you know, what ideas you come up with along the front facade. You know, one of the bigger lots that we had was the Cavalier, which I think was like 4.5 acres. That was very unusual.
And the cottages across the street.
Yeah, but look at,
Why
if you
not?
look at the cottages across the street, all of this is wetland resources, so the actual size that's actually developable is probably, you know, maybe similar in size to the Cavalier, right? Because you have all these wetlands in the back that you're gonna have to stay out of and have the buffers and all of those types of things. You know, even next to the Kia dealership, the 3 lots here, I mean, that's about 3 acres if you combine all those lots. So even if you're combining lots, you're still not coming up with things that are super, super large. And I think this is the Moose Lodge, it was like 1.6 acres. Again, not a bad shaped lot, you know? So I think even though we talk about a lot of odd shapes, I think the odd shapes kind of come in when you're abutting up against a wetland resource, and that's a little bit trickier because of the buffers. But like this is 811. So, you know, for example, if you combine those two, that could have been a potential project. If those two had gotten together and had a combined project, that would have been a 2-acre lot, or almost a 2-acre lot. When you get to like all the way down to, this is what I was talking about with, this is the lot, the Great Island Plaza, these 3 lots are owned, and then she owns this little piece here, and this is the post office here. And then Micah Coyne owns these 2
Stuff
things,
in
and
the
he came
back.
before with the mixed-use VCOD project. I don't, you know, this is a hypothetical, so even if you combined, if we said, okay, let's combine all 3 of them, that's only 3.7 acres. It's, you know, so we went through this to try and say, what kind of sizes could we reasonably be looking at? So I don't know whether we want to get too large, because there's not going to really, in practicality, I don't know how many of those projects we're actually going to have. We're going to have more of, hopefully, if we can do it, some of the smaller infill projects. So maybe this might be the biggest one. You kind of, not this site particular, but something like that, of that general size, of like 3.5 acres, you know, on a signalized intersection.
How large?
Scroll just
Yeah, I was just gonna ask the same thing.
going
Yeah.
west.
Okay.
Boom, water park.
You have, this is the Christmas tree shops, and that's 122. I promise.
So that old dilapidated hotel that's ready to fall down next to the water park, is that part of their property as well?
No, it's a separate parcel.
It's a separate parcel, but I think there's some things that are, they may have some ideas for those particular things, and it's
An
not going to be
idea for it.
mixed use.
You already went to ZBA, right?
Those are,
Actually, there's 3 falling down places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that,
I-
I'm
those
staying
are all
away
rather,
from that.
those are all rather large lots,
And
though,
they
all
flower
right
in
through
the
there,
other
right?
Not really, because one of the things you can do is you can take a look at, and we can kind of like, oh, I don't know if I can make this work.
Yeah.
If you squared it off, so to speak. You know, That's 2 acres.
2 acres, yeah.
So, I mean, this is what we were finding. We were trying to figure out the sizes, and a lot of them are smaller. Whoops. And, yeah, like this is the town-owned parcel. It's like about 1 acre. This
Kathy,
is the
that other
West
lot on the
Yarmouth.
corner across from the old police station, the chamber office there, I mean, that's been on the market for a while
Yeah.
with different brokers. Did
It's-
anything ever come to you with?
The only thing that's ever come to us was like it was I think a coffee shop with a drive-through. And because this was residential, you remember this is 17 Berry Avenue, and that was the thing that they wanted to change
Spot-
to commercial.
spot
and it
zoning.
Went down. The idea was if this was commercial, then you might be able to have,
They're in
because you need 100
17.
feet, just like
They're
J-Mart.
clearing
You need
Berry
100
Ave,
feet
that
from
lot on
all
Berry
of the drive-through components to the residential zoning district to give that buffer
They're
between
they're
those two.
clearing the lot on Berry Ave as we speak.
Cleared.
Yeah, they cleared it. But, yeah, remember
Oh, I think that's been sold.
Okay.
Yeah.
the other issue with that lot was there's no access off Route
Right,
28.
exactly, there's no
Gotta
curb
come
cut.
down Berry Ave to get
You
into
know,
it.
there's also the Mass DOT project that's happening there, and I think that they're putting in another turn lane here, so I think they're gonna be taking, it's gonna be a taking issue of some of that lot, making it even narrower. I mean, every time people come, that's one of the first things I say to them is, we have this project coming, and I have some preliminary right-of-way plans that I can share with you, but you should get in contact with Mass DOT, because I don't know if they've been changing, but some people are taking this amount, like Becker's is very small, it's not a lot at all, but others could be 5 or 6 feet, and that may impact, and especially with some of those shorter setbacks that we have in the VCOD, if it's 15-foot minimum and they're taking 10 feet,
Yeah,
you don't want to have your building right on the edge of the shared use pathway per se, because people could be whizzing by. It's not like a general sidewalk, it could be people on bikes. So there's a lot of things going on there. What?
Take them out.
Take them out. So we were kind of keeping mainly to the VCOD, but even looking at other properties, as you go further down. One of the other ones, sorry, let's get all the way to the other thing that might need to be something we think about as we move forward is, looking at the South Yarmouth Village again. Sorry, I can't quite get there very fast. But there's that strip mall there.
That would be so good if that just disappeared and all the parking was in the back.
Yes, and
And it's
when
a
you-
very vibrant retail spot. I mean, it's got a lot of stuff going on in there.
And if you combine them all together, it's about 3 acres. And you can see, if you move, this is weird because the state right-of-way there is 80 feet wide. So all their parking in this whole row of parking is literally in the layout, the state layout. But, if these buildings were in the front, you have a lot of ways you could easily access parking in the back. It could be quite nice.
And there's townland in the back, opposite the
here.
back of the library.
right.
$332,000.
You got, you,
Maybe put a library there that you'll never put there.
owners. The hardware store, hardware store is owned by somebody else that owns the other.
Nantucket Hardware, right.
So those types of things all come
Okay.
into play. And God help you if you have a condominiumized something, like the Cape Cod vacation condos took so long for them to get ownership of that because there was, I don't know, 30 owners or more. And it was a big legal thing. So condominiumization kind of, and if you're actually selling out individually, it can be very difficult to then get back into common ownership to do anything.
Madam Chair, based upon a quick run down Route 28 visually, it appears to me that we should probably be looking at 1, 2, and 3 acres.
Up to 1, up to 2,
and
up to 3. You guys okay with that?
Yeah,
That works for me.
makes sense.
The only other question then became, did we want to look at developments of different densities? Right now, all of our VC 1, 3, and 4 allow up to 16 units per acre if you have a minimum of 15% commercial. We lowered the amount of commercial because we were having difficulty with getting anybody interested in it. I think when it got lowered, that's when Micah Coyne came forward with his particular project. But do we want to be looking at 16 units per acre? Do we want to be looking at different, like a 12 unit per acre? Or do we just, or do we want to see what we can maximize on the properties and go with what the maximum the zoning would allow?
I think this goes back to, again, the issue of, the bloodline of septic, sewering. Because, once you have a bloodline there, what's the difference if you put 24 units on an acre or 16 units? It's,
Other than the capacity of the plant to handle it.
so,
And we-
maybe the density, instead of 16, maybe, might be, I don't know, maybe it needs to go the other way.
So I guess my.
Make it
my-
financially feasible.
Yeah. My question is, if we were to look at the density as it exists now, are we uncomfortable with that? I mean, we've approved several projects in the time I've been on the board, where applicants came in with viable projects and were able to accommodate the project with the existing density. I don't think I want more density. I don't think I do.
So maybe go with
What's
allowed
existing
right
now?
And see what,
Yeah, see what
Develops.
comes in, and
we're familiar with that, we know what it looks like. Let's start with that and see if it has to be modified.
Yeah. I do think that we do, obviously, in the VCODs, allow for up to 48 feet and 4 stories, but then it's the setback at 50 feet. So as what Peter was saying, is by the time you do all the setbacks and
Right.
some of these weird,
Doesn't
you know,
work.
right, you're not able to take advantage of the 4. It's only when you get into a larger
units
lot
all on top
or
of each
a
other.
more square lot
Right.
where you could be able to take advantage of that.
Mr. Saban.
I understand the issue of density, but I'm also trying to think from the perspective of a potential developer. And there needs to be the financial incentive for them to achieve the project, to achieve the goal of completing a project. And if we're telling them, you can only do 16 units, but in reality, we know, and I don't know this, but 24 units is their break point. Well, how many of these projects are we going to stop from happening because we have a restriction on density that may keep the project from being viable? I don't know what that answer is. I don't know what that number is, but I keep looking at 68 years of living in this town and hearing, the difficulties of developing, and then you drive down Route 28 and say, well, it must be true because we haven't experienced the economic growth that Hyannis has done, or look what's going on in Dennisport and Howard. So we're doing something wrong, in my opinion. I don't know what it is, but these other towns seem to be getting it together to get these things done. What is it that we're doing differently? And is it a density issue? Is it regulatory issues? I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I don't know either, but when you, the Harwich projects in particular, the 2 on Main Street, one of which is done. And then there's the one in Harwich Center. They're not big.
Yeah.
They're not big. They're beautiful, I think. And I just think that how those developers made it work, I'd like to know, because they made it work.
That's why they make money.
They made it work because their rents are twice as what they're gonna get here on Route 28. What they can rent their commercial space for and their apartments.
And
quite a bit more.
beautiful little Harwichport.
Harwichport is incredible.
Yeah, yeah, I bet.
It's
Yeah,
a-
okay.
Yeah.
But Yarmouth can be too, if we do it right. But you're right, they do it, as you know, they do a tremendous amount of work before they decide to invest in a community.
If you go to Harwichport in the afternoon, I mean, it's young,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
active, the restaurants, he can put 2 more restaurants there because there's 2 more up the street. It's almost like part of Commercial Street, like
Yep.
Provincetown. It's just, there's all foot traffic.
And it didn't used to be that way.
No.
They have created that,
That's right.
And all the property values around it just went nuts.
skyrocketed.
So
Yeah.
Crazy
it
numbers.
supports that. It supports what they pay in rent.
They do, as you know, they do a tremendous amount of work before they decide to go into a community and invest. They just not walking around and just hit with a pencil and saying, oh, let's go into Yarmouth. If they think they can make money, they'll make it work, even if it's small. And it's all driven by profit. And Peter said they look at the rents, they look at what can I get, what's there now. So a lot of that is out of our hands. A lot of that they come armed with, and they know what their breakpoint is, and they know what pencils out and what doesn't. And we just need to provide the environment that can take that plan and maybe with a few modifications, make it work for them. And they will invest. They will, remember, it's an investment. It's an investing in an opportunity to make money.
Do we know by chance what we're talking about Howard. This one, 7-Eleven, interesting that the name of 7-Eleven Food Mart It's not a 7-Eleven, but the address is 7-Eleven. I'm wondering what the site size of that is. I mean,
I didn't have a
Because-
chance to look at that, and I don't, it wasn't one of the ones that
That's
was.
in Harwich Center.
It's beautiful. It's actually very nice. It's relatively small, again, and it's not a huge lot. But they own, it's the same developer who owns the liquor store. And they redid all of that building too, and I think it looks pretty good as well. But I think it's interesting, Harwich is seeming to make it work. So maybe if the rents are the things that are making it work in Harwich, maybe that's the tax incentives or some type of financial incentive that maybe we're doing in Yarmouth that makes us a little bit more attractive. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the density. I think by the time you take into consideration the buffer zones, which I'm sure we want to keep, and then the parking, that we've come to realize that right now in the VCOD, it's minimum of 1, maximum of 1.5 for residential. We just had 811 come and we're like, this is going to be for young professionals. They're going to be a couple. They're both going to have cars. We need more parking, and they got special permit relief for 2 parking spaces. So back in the day, one of the things of this whole this is next to the Kia dealership, and across from the Moose Lodge. One of the things when we were doing the VCOD is I think the Davenports owned it at the time, and they were interested in developing it into nice condominiums. And I think even in the VC2, you're allowed to go up to 20 units per acre with a minimum, I think, of 100,000 square foot lot, which they had. And they couldn't make it work. They were having trouble fitting everything in and getting all the parking that they wanted. I think they were even doing those.
They looked at them.
Yeah, they looked at a lot of things, so I think there's
The
going to be a
lift-
certain
the New
level
York
where you
lift.
just can't fit everything on a site and have the adequate parking that you need. And that was one of the other things that we talked with Union Studios is that they're also going to do things based on our zoning, but then they're going to say, identify like, oh, wait a minute, this made it really hard. And they might be providing some, they might be providing some guidelines of saying, and we were kind of talking about, maybe you should be looking at 2
Yeah.
parking spaces per residential unit, because that, that's kind of the nature, especially depending on, if you really are talking about couples, that would definitely be the case. And even if you do have some people who don't need both, you have guests and stuff, so
sure.
it's, so having that, so they're going to take a look at all of that. So maybe we'll just say, do it based on the zoning, but keep in mind, maybe we need 2 parking spaces per unit.
and find out what Howard and Dennisport are doing right.
I think Peter's spot on there.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Harwich Port's different than the Harwich. I mean, this other one, the 7-Eleven. This project here on the back, that wasn't mentioned either. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that was
Just one I happened to notice.
Yeah, that's a nice
It's a
project. I
nice
mean,
project,
Yeah.
but that's right on Main Street in
Right.
Howardsport.
I don't know if they ended up getting it, but they wanted $1 million for the condo on the top floor at one time, so I mean.
Did they really?
Falmouth, in downtown Falmouth area has done a lot of economic redevelopment as
yeah.
well.
There's another town.
Falmouth,
It just
Well,
created a whole new
they have an
image.
economic development authority,
yeah.
just,
I can look at some of those. I mean, I know that Jeff has a certain limited scope of work, but I mean, I can look at the Food Mart one and kind of maybe the other one and see what I can find on them.
I think the chairman is correct that a lot of these successful developments are smaller scale versus the big, large. I'm friends with a developer who's building an awful lot of stuff right now, and I just spent a week sitting on a beach with him, and all I heard about was the regulatory issues that he's gone through to do some, and we all know who he is, but I won't name him, but his biggest thing was the regulatory hurdles that they have to go through. Even if they want to build a affordable housing project, that's what makes it, that's where the money goes that you get no return on.
That was one of the other things that we talked about too with Union Studios is understanding that things are very complicated and maybe cutting down, having to go to multiple places. I mean, like the VCOD, why do you need to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals for special permit relief? Why can't we just leave the site plan review and special permit relief right here? You're seeing it already. And then you're cutting out all of that. Maybe we don't need to go to the design review committee. If you guys are doing design review, cut that out. just go to site plan review, which is just the team, the staff, which is very valuable, just getting all the staff there together and getting all your input in once, and then come here. And so just simplifying that all together and not making it so complicated. And then, we've talked for many years that the VCOD bylaw is very complex, almost too complex. So, looking at ways of making it simple. And we've chipped away at some simple things by making a lot of things special permit if we couldn't quite get to it, and being a little bit more generic in some of the language. But in all reality, it should probably be, half the size that it is. We've put on optional overlay district on top of optional overlay district to kind of set the table to make us as attractive as possible. Now, what we're finding is maybe we're just confusing people. Let's see what we can do about making some things a little bit simpler. I'm very interested in how, I do like the road bylaw, I even liked it when I first interviewed here. I made a comment about how I liked it because it allows so much flexibility. I think it scares people that they have to come here, and then they also have to go to the ZBA, and it's all the development costs. You never know what you're going to get, and you want certainty. But you could get a lot of flexibility through that. And we've seen multiple projects go through the road, and I think we're pretty reasonable in going through that.
Soft costs can kill a project that quick.
And again, maybe you guys are the special permit relief for some of these optional overlays. You already are for motels. So, something to think about to simplify it, make it one-stop shopping. Because sometimes I was just joking. I'm like, I see a project 3 times. I see it in design review, site plan review, and then I see it when it comes to you guys. It's like,
And I think that's a valid point. I mean, and I like the idea that what Kathy mentioned earlier, going back and talking to some of these people who have come through this process and finding out, what went well and what didn't and what can we do to fix. It's kind of like when you have a bad meal at the restaurant. If you don't tell them, they're going to continue to have bad meals. Well, if we don't interview all of these developers or potential developers about the hurdles that they've, come across, how can we correct those hurdles and make things a little easier and more palatable for somebody to come in and invest in our community?
I do think the changes, one of the changes that came about was with regard to appealing special permits. I think there's a higher bar for people to appeal it than what it used to be before. So I think that is beneficial. Someone's gone through all the process, they've made it through the hurdle of the special permit, and then they get appealed in that whole process. So making it, you have to, a higher bar you need to do to appeal something.
The old NIMBY here.
So I guess the last thing I wanted to talk about was the schedule. I think Jeff touched upon it. As I mentioned, the community planning grant all needs to be done by June 30th, so we're rushing. I think Union Studios, we're going to have the discussion with them next Wednesday, maybe, or, because they're going to be working up, here we go. One of their first tasks has to do with developing a comprehensive site program that builds on the benchmarking results, identifying key components of each development scenario, and they're going to develop a program ensuring flexibility and options for residential unit types and commercial uses, present this information in a table format, and then the planning board will review and select the most optimal alternatives for further design consideration. I think we did a lot of that tonight, and maybe that's sufficient, but I'll certainly relay this information to them and see whether this is just a case of them providing the table, and we can talk about it some more, or they can come and talk about it. So that's going to be maybe happening at the May 7th meeting, is kind of finalizing all of that, because the remainder of the month, they're going to be working with staff to come up with some of the conceptual site development layout plans for these 3 different sites. And then on June 4th, and I'm sorry, also in May, as Jeff mentioned, they're going to be working on their zoning analysis for us. And on June 4th, they were going to come with a presentation and for us and their final kind of report on that. And we're also going to have Union Studios come at the same time, and they would have their renderings and some discussion on the zoning changes that they have. Hoping in a couple weeks to have a meeting with the Cape Cod Chamber. Bill Scott had, I think, kind of arranged that. We just need to get the date and get kind of the higher level developers. And then we're going to have another meeting sometime in June, between June 4th and like later in the month to talk with some of these local developers, see who we can kind of get to come into a room and have these conversations in a kind of an informal way. We could certainly see what we can do about getting different developers to come. And then June 25th would be Union Studios' final report and presentation. And then, of course, when this is all done, we're then going to need to take a look at our key issues and action items and see whether we need to make any modifications based on this additional analysis that's been done. So busy next couple months, and it looks like we're going to need an extra meeting on June 25th, which is not our normal meeting day.
Kathy, what's May 7th again? Could you have May 7th again? Is that,
For May 7th, that's our regular meeting.
Yeah, that's what I
Yep.
thought, okay.
And hopefully we'll have some discussions with Union Studios, but I think one of the things we're going to have first is, we've been asked to take a look at some additional zoning amendments for the fall, and he knows exactly what I'm talking about, related to boat storage, which we did before. I think I mentioned this already, and then also, with the retail sales for fish and shellfish is something to look at. I'll include the accessory dwelling units on there. I'm not going to have any information, but just so you know that those are the things that we would be looking at, potentially having changes for the fall special town meeting. In addition to, having the local comprehensive plan done.
Yeah, that's it.
So, so exciting. I mean, we could have a lot of amazing stuff done by the end of the year, so it's all good. That's what I had. Jeff, do you have anything else to add?
I did want to offer one element, like my 2 cents on. I think it's going to fall under what Union Studios might do, but I think that was a great discussion. I was listening and taking notes, and there's a lot of that I think falls under the regulatory assessment. So I was kind of trying to absorb some of that as well. But it was something I think Susan said, and something I think what Jim was saying is, if at all possible, one of the most elusive things is what does a developer do to find out if a project pencils out? Because they do that pretty early in their assessment of a project, and I know that they look at the zoning and they come up with rough numbers. And if there was any opportunity for your work to talk to a developer who's willing to share the elements of what they're looking at in terms of the cost. So there's the cost of acquisition, of a property. Sometimes there's cost of demolition. There's the cost of permitting, and then there's the cost of what could they achieve per rental unit, and then what would be the revenue from a commercial space. And if you could get insight into what pencils out, I think that would be really helpful to help determine the density that you were talking about, that 16 units per acre. I think finding out if that pencils out or if that might be one of the constraints. That's something that I know we're going to identify that as the density as a possible constraint, but I don't know that we have enough scope to interview a developer to talk about kind of their back end, the front end actually. It's really early in the process, but so that was my 2 cents. Is if there was any opportunity to get a developer to talk to you about that, it might be really informative.
We might be able to do that because for the 2 affordable housing LIHTC projects that Dakota did at the Cavalier, and then Jim Perrine at the Yarmouth Gardens, they had to do a full pro forma, as part of their their submittal to the Affordable Housing Trust, because we gave them some money and they through an RFP. So they can kind of see, these are all of your expenses, so to speak, and here's your income and kind of what they use for some of those things. So we can certainly see if we can't, they're on the list of potential people to invite.
Yeah, you might want someone who's not doing LIHTC and all the affordable housing tax
know.
credits, because that's why I think
Yeah.
you and many other communities are getting the all affordable developments, is because they stack those dollars together and it really works for their pro forma. But I think that's the private kind of developer of a mixed use property, just understanding what they're putting together would be helpful. Like I said, it's elusive. They're not often willing to share that.
Yeah, agreed. 'Cause
Yeah, I mean,
we do have the 3 mixed-use projects that are kind of going on now with the J-Mart,
some of the costs are fixed costs, and it's the ones they can't control that are problematic, and you're trying to find a point where, okay, let's put this into our project and see if it works. If it comes in above that, you need to adjust your rent, you need to do it. It's the soft costs, as Jim pointed out, that you cannot control. And some of it's financing. I mean, financing is all over the place now. And unless you can get a bank to commit to something early, you may not get your financing number until well into the development, idea. So it's an interesting discussion, and, these minds make those decisions all the time. That's why it's called an investment. You roll the dice and see what time brings you.
So the point on the calendar piece, Kathy, is we're scheduling an extra meeting in June.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone knows their availability.
But we might be able to couple that with no July 3rd.
Yes, we did mention that, yes. If we're meeting 3 times in June, we probably don't need to meet 1 week later. And it's the 4th of July week anyway, so,
Be in Canada, eh?
in July, but not in June.
Yeah, I'm doing.
Madam Chair, I won't be
Canada.
able to be there on June 25th. That's the first night of camp. And as someone who's worked every July 4th for the last 25 years, I say, what's the big deal? Why is it so? Why people are like, as soon as the word July is mentioned, it's like the calendar gets radioactive. It's so funny. It's all good, though, of course, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Will.
Obviously, we want to make sure that we have as many people there as possible, and I certainly understand the first day of camp is.
I don't understand at all. He's been doing it for so many years, unacceptable.
Okay, I will.
Shouldn't it just be automatic by now, Will? Just
Yeah,
open
that's how it
open the
works.
door, leave
Yeah.
the keys.
Leave the
Yeah,
keys.
the longer you do something, the less work you have. Yes, that's how it works.
Don't we wish?
So any more on this topic, Kath?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, great.
Well, we're good on this.
Yeah.
But we got I was going to go right on to something else, but we have to look at the changes to this,
Oh, yeah,
and the
Policy.
select board meeting. Because we have a select board meeting update on the 6th.
Right.
On the local comprehensive plan. I think one of the things when I was kind of thinking about putting it together, talking about obviously all the great community input we've done with the interviews, the open house, community meetings, we have all the online mapping stuff, but then also talking about the key issues and action items, and I'm like, this is a lot of work. Why don't we get this a little bit, talk about it tonight with some of the edits from the last meeting and some of the input from Chief Lennon, and maybe attach this to the memo? Because this shows them where we're going, and maybe we'll actually get some early input from the select board on where we're going. So it doesn't become something like when we're presenting the full draft to them and they're like, oh, I don't like that, or why did you do that? They'll kind of have that. So I was kind of hoping to maybe go through this tonight, and I'm sorry,
Jeff. He asked, do they need to stay?
what's this?
Does he need to stay?
Did he go? Either way.
No, I'm still here. I would like to just stay for this discussion and hear it. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, no, and I
But you have to hang out for nothing.
I did send this to you. I did, just so you know what we were talking about, and hopefully Will has it electronically as well, because I don't think we're going to be able to see it here particularly. But the growth policy, I did, just so you know, I accepted all the changes from the last time. And then, so anything that's here, red line, is based on a change, based on comments from the last meeting. So I think, with the key issues, I think we're just trying to modify some of the way things were worded. So threats to drinking water quality, and a lot of these came from Joanne about cost and rate implications for water supply. And I added infrastructure and treatment, going down to, instead of developing funding mechanisms, the key issue is sustainable funding mechanisms. And then also identification of suitable locations, and then just water quality deterioration of our freshwater ponds, and then kind of getting rid of the last item. I think this, hopefully this accurate, maybe we can go through and you can let me know if you think this accurately reflects kind of what we talked about. I'll just keep going unless you tell me otherwise. One of the things that we also talked about maybe was as the importance of the regional septic treatment facility. So I ended up including, continue the operation of the regional septic treatment facility, which treats and disinfects wastewater pumped from septic systems under the wastewater, under item 3 there, under wastewater. 'Cause it's kind of all related to,
and there was an article, town meeting last night on this subject.
yeah,
It's not in good shape.
yeah.
Makes you Want to get bottled water.
And also, like, if we had things where I said, you know, there were questions, like any specific project, if no one's mentioned anything so far, I've just I'm going to cross them out.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't mean I won't hear from maybe some staff or something. And again, the same thing here under wetland resources is just wetland resources and buffers at risk. And then also getting rid of the last item there about ensuring adequate protection for wetland resources, because it's more of an action, not necessarily a key issue. And then moving on, I did the same thing with the plant and wildlife habitats at risk from development. Oops. Oh, we got several pages of nothing. And then we come back to community design and land use. Again, we got rid of the first item there, and the second item really just being more generic of balancing a mix of commercial and residential development along Route 28. I think that's what we finally had come up with as the language for that. I do know that when we were talking about transportation, the Cape Cod bridges came up on page 9 there. I just meant it's the deteriorated condition of the Cape Cod bridges and impacts to the transportation network and economic viability of our community during the long-term bridge repairs and replacement. That might be too long.
Perfect.
Okay.
Very good.
And then as you move to the next page, I felt like we identified that as a key issue, so what kind of is our related action items? You know, and as feasible, support the funding, design, and implementation of Mass DOT's Cape Cod Bridges program to replace the Sagamore and Bourne Bridge and surrounding transportation network. And again, getting rid of some of the extra questions.
Kathy, I'm thinking only because, as I mentioned earlier, my street became a bypass for sewer. And I'm guessing that when the Bass River Bridge project starts, the mitigation plan that DOT has got to put in place should be, you know, is going to be very important.
I believe that they're going to be maintaining the traffic like they did with the Parkers River Bridge, where they moved to the 2 lanes
Right,
to 1/2 while they're working on that, and then they would move it back.
okay.
That's my understanding. Because you're absolutely right, that can't stay closed.
I'm trying to remember, do we actually mention that project? The replacement of the bridge?
It was mentioned on the earlier page about some of the, about it's in poor condition, Madam Chair. It's under key issues on page 9, near the bottom, above the Cape Cod bridges. I mean, the truth is, it's being replaced. Well, at the same time, it's still a key issue. Both things are true.
Where am I missing?
That's
that?
the Route 6 bridge, Will.
The Route 6 bridge.
That's not the Route
Bass River
28
Bridge is not
bridge.
mentioned. I think
Oh, I'm
that's,
so sorry. I thought you were talking about Bass River. Sorry.
that's
Sorry.
okay.
It is a bullet point on page 9, Route 6, Route 6.
Wondering if it needs an associated
And
action.
those bridges aren't in great shape either, so.
You know what? I didn't focus on the number, Madam Chair. I just saw Bass River Bridge, and I just thought you were talking about the one that we associate with between Dennis and Yarmouth. Just add the other one right there in the same.
Yeah, I think that reconstruction project is going to have impacts, no matter what. It's going to have, and they're going to have, you know, having rebuilt some bridges in New York and New Jersey, mitigation is really important. They're going to have it open and closed. Even if they say they're going to keep it open, it'll be open and closed if they do any work at night. And I just think the effects on that particular neighborhood is going to be significant on both sides of the river. I'm sorry I'm bringing it up now.
No, that's fine. I'm just
but
wondering
I do think-
what is the actual action item that we're talking about?
I just think it would have to be close communication and collaboration with DOT, not unlike what we're trying to do with the Route 28 roadway replacement. We need to, you know, be on, like Jeff usually is, on top of it, and knowing what some of the, you know, main issues are. And it also will affect the waterway underneath it, and all of us who have boats and have the more communication, the better. I think the marine traffic as well as the automobile traffic and pedestrian traffic over the bridge is going to be affected by it for years to come. So, I'm sorry, I'm just,
No, this is easy.
Looks
the
easy.
traffic through my neighborhood today got me going. Big trucks with loud mufflers.
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick question?
You may.
This is pretty in detailed stuff that's going on in this town and the things that we're planning on doing. Some of these things have already been accomplished in action items. I know you said what, and I just turned the page. I should have been ready for that, wouldn't I have? So things like, one of them was the completion of page 13. The other night, we passed money to develop a historic Yarmouth initiative to identify, preserve, and protect. No, that's not the one.
The fabrication and installation of the,
Yeah, the installation of Revolution, so we're going to do that. It's been passed. I guess,
it's not fabricated or installed.
well, this is true, and maybe
There
that's,
hasn't been a contract awarded, and the Attorney General hasn't approved it yet.
that's true, too. So I can see where these would be action items. That one would be
There may be
one.
times that by the time fall comes, we've
Yeah,
got.
we'll be deleting some stuff.
There are, and I
Yes, they should.
apologize, because I just kept
Yeah,
flipping through.
that's a
There are
good
some of
one.
these that are, we are,
Really close.
you know, for people that don't pay attention to what goes on in town, if they pay attention for 1 second, there's a lot of stuff that we're getting done in this town, and my point
Very
being
good
is,
point.
as I'm flipping through, I'm seeing some of this stuff, gee, we just passed that at town meeting, or we just accomplished that. You know, the Parkers River Landing is near completion, so,
This is giving people a really good, and that's why maybe it's a little more wordy, and I know that Jeff has, going to do some wordsmithing and some combining and some organization and everything, but I'm really thinking that people may only read the action. And it needs to be described enough so that people understand kind of what it is. So we'll wordsmith some of that, but I think this is kind of the bulk of the right ideas. I guess that's kind of where we're at.
could we maybe add like an asterisk next to the ones that are like in progress, or
We will
near
ultimately
completion?
do that in the actual
in the final-
implementation plan, because
in the
we
implementation.
Identify in the number of years.
Okay, so an implementation, that's what that'll be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a good point. Because a lot of these things are happening now, and some may happen for the full
Yeah.
next 5 years, or may not start, like the bridges and stuff, you know, some of them may not actually start construction, but we can certainly support that.
It's a pretty impressive list of things that the town is working on, and
So just on page 11, under waste management, again, minimizing the volume of materials sent to landfills, again, that's kind of seen as an actual action, so that was eliminated. So typo and effectiveness. Yep, nothing really significant on there. Page 13, I just, again,
Jim, just to get back to your point on page 13, number 4, that article on the town common was passed last night.
right.
That's a perfect example, yeah.
but we need to do the assessment
Yeah.
now.
Right.
Yeah, I figured if it didn't pass, we would just,
We'll just redline
That's
that one.
right.
Everything passed last night.
I probably will take, we'll take out the select board goal there, so. on
Could I go back to page 12 for a second? So, under capital infrastructure facilities, it says this will be its own section. The goals and key issues that you have listed here, they'll jive with what's going to be added under
Yes,
that section?
yes.
So that all corresponds with each other?
I mean,
Okay.
a lot of the infrastructure projects here aren't necessarily ours. Like, all the Mass DOT projects aren't ours, but there will be, like, things like the sewering and the, the water treatment, the PFAS for the other two wells, all of those things, are identified in the capital improvement program. I need to get with Bill Scott, too, and make sure that It's nice because you're done for the fiscal, for the fiscal year, so we kind of have a good plan for the next 5 to 10 years, so.
So is that where action items will be filled in through?
Yes, yep.
And there is a 5-year plan?
It's a
On
5 to
capital?
10-year plan.
Yeah, there's a 5 in it. We're working on it. 10's not done.
Yeah.
Not done? Oh, no.
No, we're working on it. We're working on a 10-year capital plan. There's a 5-year plan right now that needs to be finalized, and a 10-year plan is in the works. And we're also working on a totally separate transportation plan, meaning town vehicles,
Yeah,
separate
yeah,
from the
rolling
rest of
stock.
capital.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
So a rolling stock plan, that was the name of it. That's going to be completely separate to get that under control.
When do you think that's gonna, when do you think that's gonna be done, or do you think that's?
That's our task, we've been tasked to try and get that done by this fall.
Okay, oh, interesting, okay.
They just need the team to
We'll be
all.
editing that section up to the last minute.
Could I add something real quick on the capital infrastructure facilities plan? That was something that when Kathy and I had the call with the Cape Cod Commission, they said, I think we will be trying to put together the draft language for that chapter. And then we are going to rely on the SIP that you guys already have, the 5-year plan at least. We'll identify the goal of that 10-year plan. But they made a good point, and it would be an exercise that we would expect to probably do with the planning board between now and like August, before the public hearing time, is looking to make sure that there are not projects, because if there are any other projects that are not listed in the CIP somewhere, that we probably want to pull them into this capital infrastructure plan section. So you guys have done tremendous work to come up with your fiscal policies, and that'll get mentioned, and then you have the projects that are known. It's kind of those projects that maybe would be falling outside of that 10-year span. They have made the suggestion that this would be a good place to kind of put them, or refer to them at least in a tangential way at least. So I just wanted to mention that because that's kind of something that's forthcoming on our task over the next few weeks to come up with a draft chapter for you guys.
Awesome. Okay. We'd already got nothing on 14. I think this was just rewording the comment on high-speed, just saying, expand access to high-speed internet to other areas of town. I think that was the discussion that we had last time, maybe modifying that. I think this was mostly a discussion with you, Ken. Did you have, is that?
Yes, that was a piece that I asked, yes.
Oh, whoops. Housing. Town services. We did have, you guys had a great comment about the fire has a strategic plan. What about the police strategic plan? I sent an inquiry to the police chief asking if he had the strategic plan, but I also gave him the standard questionnaire, which is basically, what are your 3 key issues? What are your main key issues? What are you doing to address these issues? And what are you going to be doing in the next 5 to 10 years? And he gave a great response. You guys have, I printed that out for everyone, and I tried to incorporate it into this document. I think the key is some of the things that he mentioned, like substance abuse and mental health issues. I left that under health. I didn't put it also under public safety. So there's some places, and that's the whole thing with this entire thing. There's certain things that could go in so many different locations, but you had to kind of pick a spot to have it, or you'd be duplicating everything. I think one of the things that the chief did mention was, they also feel impacts of limited attainable housing is really impacting town recruitment and staffing. So we wanted to emphasize that. I put that under government because I think it's doing all municipal government. It's not just police and fire. But he did have some very interesting ideas that I did incorporate in here related to limited funding available for training and staff development. He wants to do a lot more training, and sometimes you get some grants for these things, but those things seem to be drying up a little bit, so making sure that we have funding for that. And there's also a very high cost of investment to onboard public safety personnel. He said like $90,000 per candidate. And if you spend them to send them through the whole academy and everything, and then they leave a couple of years later, that's a huge expense that the town of Yarmouth has borne, that we're not getting any long-term benefits out of it. We also noticed increasing language barriers with residents and visitors that do not speak English. And then also being sure to staying current with evolving technology to enhance police service, and also increasing the number of technology-related crimes that they have to investigate. I think I might have missed something else, but, and then just so, going, I guess, to the top of page 19 of looking at it,
Kathy, the one thing I think you and I talked about, or you mentioned, was one of his actions is to develop a strategic plan.
yes,
The chief.
I realized as I had already printed it
noted
all
said- your
out,
noted said
and I had sent it to you guys,
Yeah.
that, develop an updated police strategic plan will be right underneath the implementate.
You're right.
I should say, develop and implement. And I'll put that right underneath the fire department.
Yeah. Yep.
But at the top there, I mean, I did feel like, even though we talk about different housing, I think it really came up through the Matakes process of creating housing specifically for municipal employees or teachers or people in the healthcare profession that we want to be serving all of us here. So just investigating ways to provide attainable housing for critical positions in municipal government, education, and healthcare. I think it is something that we're doing already at Matakes, at least with the recommendations from the housing land use group. One of the things that the chief also mentioned is that we're talking about number 3, leveraging grants to fund personnel, training, and public education. I added technology and equipment, but what he's finding is that a lot of these grants are drying up, so we might need to start putting them into our annual municipal budget. And also things that if it's personnel and we need them long-term, it needs to be in the budget. It's not something that, you might be able to get away with a grant the first year, and I know the fire's been able to get some grants in the past as well. But if you really need 4 more people, you need to ultimately be putting them in the budget for that. So that's what that is. And then also, one of the things he mentioned was being sure that we retain funding for a full-time clinician working with the police department, because again, I think that's grant-funded, and that's at risk right now. I'm not sure I got all the way through everything that he had. The only thing, the language barriers was one thing that I don't know whether we want to do an action item with that, related to that, because he basically noted that officers continue to encounter language barrier issues when assisting residents and visitors who do not speak English. Portuguese and Spanish are the most common languages encountered. We currently use a language line interpreter service, but that is becoming cost prohibitive. Researching devices officers can carry in the field to translate, and also seeking candidates that are bilingual.
There
Google
are,
Translate. Hi, everybody, Google Translate.
there are actually earbuds. I have one for work for my Portuguese staff. The earbuds you can put in your ear, and it will
Translated.
translate what they're saying in Portuguese to English. Then I speak into my phone, and it transmit what I'm saying back into Portuguese back to them.
How expensive is that?
Like $45 for the earbud, and Google Translate's on your phone as an app. So there are workarounds, that's all I'm saying. I mean, the police have a vastly different test than I do managing people. But all I'm saying is for $45, you put an earbud in your ear and it works almost incredibly. It really is.
And if you don't have the money for the app works great.
Yeah.
Just could you speak into the phone and translate it right there in front of you.
I use it all the time when I travel.
Maybe that's what he's just talking about.
I can't even spell a Greek word.
Each officer needs a $50 earbud or something.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're working on that, and I don't know whether we need to do anything about that.
They're
with the
smart over there, they'll figure it out.
Yep.
There's also lots of social service organizations that are doing the bilingual programs, so very much in the forefront.
Yeah, don't need to hire an interpreter, everything's right there.
So that was all I had. So if you guys are good with that, I might
Very
just-
well done.
Might just accept the edits and then attach that as, yeah, okay, that sounds good. And I'll just, what I'm going to do, is I'm going to have just a little quick summary memo, and then I'm going to attach this. I'm going to work up a PowerPoint, but I'm not going to be able to get it into their packet by tomorrow. So I'm just going to summarize the memo kind of in like a little PowerPoint presentation.
Do we need a motion to accept this, or?
It's still draft. I'll just put draft 4 on it or something.
Accept it.
Kathy, could I ask a question?
Sure.
Well, first, thank you, because I think your collaboration and working through this is great. It's helping us too. So I appreciate that a lot. All the way back on like page 1, I should have chimed in at the beginning, but I think there's one thing I would want to discuss briefly with this board as you're going to the select board. I think providing them this document is great because I think it is really the core of what we're going to see in the LCP. But I think we might want to be letting them know that some of it may shift around.
Yeah.
It may not really look the same, and we wouldn't want it to exactly look the same. But I think my point is that right now, because this is a nice consolidation, you have goal, key issues, and actions.
Right.
And I think one of the structures that we're looking at is like existing conditions is going to cover sort of the key issues, and then we're going to have the relationship to the town efforts, like the plans that relate. We're going to have that kind of in the beginning of the LCP, and then towards the end when we get into that targeted action plan, and that's where it shifts to goal, and then it's the actions. And so I just don't want someone to get confused where we have it all kind of like bundled together. We're going to kind of unbundle it a little bit. I think all the language that you're working on, we're going to try to maintain all that. So that's very helpful for us. But I just wanted to say that out loud. That I think for the select board, they might want to know that these are the pieces. The pieces might move.
Good point.
And then related, one thing I did want to mention, and Kathy and I spoke about this briefly, and unfortunately we're not at the same pace as you guys. One of the proposed changes that we're kind of in the process of making, it's relatively minor, but it's worth mentioning, is related to water resources. It's really one of the first thing that comes up, and it's the goal. It's really the first goal. I'm looking at page 2, fresh marine and ocean. And the goal is to attain sustainable supply of high quality drinking water to meet our community needs and preserve, protect, and restore the quality and functions of our fresh marine and ocean resources. What we're finding is that we would like to pull that apart into at least 2 or 3 goals, because as we pan through the rest of the document, it's going to make things easier. So the quality of drinking water becomes water supply. And we kind of see 2 things here, which is the quality. So all the PFAS and all those similar issues that relate to the quality, and also the supply is whether there's enough water to supply future development. So we're kind of suggesting that goal would become attain sustainable supply of high quality drinking water to meet our community needs. And that helps us flesh out this water supply, which then breaks down to the key issues. We can kind of pull some of them apart and isolate them a little bit better. And then the actions become easier to show at the end. And if you just bear with me for a moment, I think the other really important piece of pulling them apart is the wastewater. We've seen so many discussions, the importance of that is so high. So what we're proposing is there be the secondary goal to continue with the implementation of the Yarmouth wastewater program. And that's an overarching goal, and it allows us to call out these actions that are all kind of wastewater oriented. And it makes us that first section is what I think we really got bogged down in our first draft, you guys, is there's so much under just those 2 categories. It allows us to then break off kind of wetlands and freshwater and saltwater as other goals. And it just helps that section kind of breathe a little bit. Whereas that one goal, it's very dense, and it was hard for us to break it down without pulling out different goals. So I don't think you need to change anything for the select board packet, but I think just talking to them a little bit about how some of these pieces might move around a little bit moving forward.
Yeah, Jeff and I had talked about that, and I thought it was a great idea. And so when he started moving things, this is a good guide. It's not the exact, but I really think that once you go into the details, he might find that even like some action items might be served better in different locations as we move along with the thing. So I thought that was a great idea.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
So
Kathy, maybe you can just incorporate that notion in your cover memo
Yes.
as well,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Because I think that, the original kind of table of contents that we had
Yes.
laid out, that might be helpful.
I'm going to steal, like, for the PowerPoint, I'm going to steal that slide of the table of contents that BSC group.
And
worked
that's
out.
where these things move into different, they rest in different places.
Yeah, and then just one other point, which I think would be important for your select board is, there is a lot here, and it might be a lot for them to kind of absorb, but I think by all the effort that's been put in so far, I think we've identified like the lion's share of what we would see go in there. There might be something new that comes forward, like the police department strategic plan is kind of a good example, but we're not expecting the wholesale brand new items floating in at this point. I think we have a pretty good handle on it, so I think it's a good point to present to them, and I think by giving it to them, in a real honest way, like all these action items have been put forward, kind of they're getting worked through, but I think it's a really good assessment of where we're at overall, and I'm not expecting like any real big surprises with new items at this point, so I think it's a good time to present to them. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
One other thing that Jeff and I talked about was, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, we had talked about maybe doing a survey, and I think there were some concerns about maybe having survey overload, and that maybe what we should be doing is, we've done this on other things, where we have the draft open for public comment for like 45 days, and somewhere in there is our public presentation, and then people can be providing their comments on that. So I don't know if you had anything to add on that, Jeff?
Well, I mean, I think we were talking about it internally, and the idea of a survey sounds good, and I know that I talked about it, but I do think we want to make sure that we would be getting something from it, and so we did start to have this discussion where, at this point, would we, it's a lot of information, so if we really tried to test people on how they react to these goals or actions, I think that there's a lot of information here. We might not get a lot of people to take the survey at this point. We're just not sure. Like if we want to rank, people on these goals, they're all really important. So if you try to say like drinking water versus, staff support for the police department, and you ask someone to rank those, we're going to probably get the drinking water, but people are going to support the other one too. So we just wanted to question the viability of a survey at this point, but really we were talking to Kathy about putting it out for draft review, and I think that's a decent approach. But I guess you probably want to talk to the select board as well. So I guess it's a discussion piece.
I think it was just kind of in talking about the next steps and the timeline. I think what I didn't know whether I should mention that we might have a survey. I think what we would mention is that do you have any, I mean, I know that we had talked about August as being the public meeting, so maybe, we would have sometime in the summer, we would have it out for public comment in addition to the time period when we have the public hearing, and then people can provide their comments. We have a particular email address all set up, lcp@yarmouth.ma.us, so people could just provide all their comments directly there. And of course, people know my address too, but Lisa keeps it all in one spot, and then we can kind of go through and make those edits. I do feel like we've gotten an enormous amount of public input, so I think as Jeff mentioned, that we are on a good track. The lion's shares of all of the issues have been, I think, identified, but people always come up with little nuggets. Maybe someone who wasn't involved, they have something to offer that's new. So I'm fine with that, and I don't mind mentioning that as a next step as part of the memo of what we would do, because the whole goal is to get us to fall town meeting.
Yeah, I think opening it up for public comment is I think people are kind of survey tired.
And it's like I mentioned before, we did do that to kind of vet the goals and objectives for the open space and rec plan, and it was just too involved. It was too involved, and you could see how people started real strong, and then the numbers dropped off as you got through the survey. People just bailed. So I agree with Jeff and Heather on that.
Okay. So good on the presentation, Kath?
I think so.
Okay.
have no minutes, sorry.
Minutes, no?
You want to get in the muck?
We could do the muck. Board member items?
I think I'm going to leave the meeting because I think muck does not directly involve me personally. So, thank you very much for your
Yeah,
time.
thanks for joining us. Thanks for the
Okay.
time.
Yep. Thanks.
Try to bring I'm going to hand out here what I was given. We had a meeting, our final meeting Monday. And the last meeting I mentioned, we had 3 scenarios that we were sort of, by meeting 2, and Kathy, you were there Monday too, so feel free to jump in. This meeting was a little over 2 hours, and it wasn't enough time for the 13 or 15 of us in a round table to really decide how we were going to present the order in which we were going to present our 3 items here, right? So I think if you scan it quickly, you can see that we had a standalone indoor-outdoor sports complex, and then we had something that was somewhat smaller, sports complex, event, performance space, and then option 3 was more of a mixed-use development, including, whether it's housing, retail, events, type space, type project. So 3 very different ideas. And we only need to put 3 into the funnel, but we were asked to number them 1 to 3, each of the committee, everybody that was there. And there was 5 from CEDC, and everybody else was local, Paul Mazucki, Jack Hines, Jamie Vieira. So the other, and of course the chamber, and some other gentlemen from, the softball, men's softball group, soccer group. So they were well represented. But, so we were asked to go through it, and it was interesting because my idea, I'll say what I was the first one to sort of come up with what I thought what I would do, which would be a combination of 1, 2, and 3, and mine was 2 and 3, because 1 is when you go through it, you see 1 is a very large, hard to imagine complex, in terms of size, scale. And of course, we haven't even gotten to the point where we can say this would really be a private development, with what we're looking at. Bill Scott was there as well yesterday. But I mean, I run down what our group thought, what the CEDC thought. But I think we have to keep in mind that, this really wasn't a CEDC committee, because we had another influence. There was actually 4 meetings. They had their meeting first, we had our meeting first. So, I think if we had more time, the CEDC to sit together after yesterday's meeting, and Courtney, our chair, is still going to put together, I think, the final answer as to how we're going to present it back to the MUC committee. But, everybody had sort of a plan, I think I wrote down numbers here, and I don't know who it was who, somebody wanted 2, somebody wanted combo 2, 3, somebody liked 1, 2, somebody liked 2, 3, someone liked 2. Paul Mazucki liked number 1, of course, so there was a lot of support for 1 on the other side, because of its size and scale, right? It's going to bring a lot of people here, not only to Yarmouth, but to, benefit the entire Cape, of course, as well. So I don't really have an answer to tell you what the final answer was.
Well, I think Alexis from Barrett Group
Yep.
was going to also be working on, what they're trying to do is get the 3 funnel down to the 1 that's moderate, and then 1 that's elevated, so to speak. I got that people were, after a lot of discussion back and forth, people were kind of leaning more towards 2, because they liked the idea of a sports facility, but they wanted to also be sure that there was some type of convention or
Meeting space, large.
performance
Yeah,
space.
call it event
And
space,
meeting
not
space.
Space.
event space.
Yeah, exactly. But then they also want to be sure that there's outdoor fields as well.
Right.
And then maybe inside the sports complex, there's talked about, well, lots of times there is retail within them, whether it's like, a small little pub or something, or I think in some of the examples that Paul Nitzwicki was talking about, they even had I think sports medicine in there, and they had, a shoe store,
Those
athletic.
are very large off-Cape communities too.
understood.
That was Pittsburgh. I mean, this is what, and my point was, I think we have to consider what we are in terms of what we
Right.
can support, and we're not, our population is very different, not only in terms of size, but age and everything else. And I don't know that we can, the Mass Mutual Center as a sort of example is sort of extreme. Granted, no one thinks we're going to do that.
No.
But along that line, that's,
I think what also came out of it is people saying, well, we don't want people to just come here and stay here. We don't want it to be a one-stop and people just stay there. We want people to go to all these other places on Route 28, so not making it too heavy on the retail or whatever other things that people will be doing there, because we want to get people out into the community. I think one of the main emphases of the kind of like, what I heard going to the first rec committee meeting was that there's a real need just for Cape Cod wide. Forget going beyond Cape Cod. All our kids are going off Cape for all of these tournaments. There's not a place here on Cape Cod. So I kind of was envisioning that the people kind of going, well, let's take care of our Cape Cod kids and do the regional tournament. Maybe there's a sports center that has some meeting spaces, convention. I think what you're what the economic team's trying to come up with is a general idea, and kind of the different sizes. And I think that's why Alexis was trying to ask about how many fields you wanted and what size and that type of thing.
size and scope was important to her, and I understand, because that's part of it. But, at the same time, we don't know really how much of the land, or how much is needed by other people, other groups. So we can't sit here and say, oh, we need 20, 30 acres. We envision, scenario 1, 2, or 3 to be this size and this number of units, because it's crazy to, the number of times I heard cart before the horse last night was often. So,
There's certainly a lot of unknown questions, and I think but I think you guys maybe have the general idea that then gets presented to the MUC. And the MUC and their consultant, BSC Group, is the one who are going to say, okay, this is what housing came up, this is what recreation came up, this is what open space and water came up, this is what the economic group. How can we come up with some combinations, and multiple combinations, and the schools? Let's not forget about maybe a potential school. And how can we do that, and what might work?
And we were very similar to recreation, from what I understand,
I
right?
think so,
I
and they're
think
doing
our
the-
sort of conclusions were sort of going in that
Mirrored
direction.
each other.
Yeah.
And they're doing the field study, too. So I think they have some ideas of what fields that they might want to see at Mattakese as well. So all of that stuff is going to kind of go into the mixer from the funnel, and hopefully, come up with some different ideas. And I think what you will identify is, this may be what we want to do, and it gets identified, but is this really something that's feasible? Is there a market for this? And that's another analysis that it needs to be done, because we certainly don't want to go down the Marina Road, where we had an idea, but then years and
Another
years
10
and
years
years
of my life
later,
to get.
we found that it really wasn't financially viable. And then there was a whole discussion about, whether we sell the land, a public-private partnership, or whether it's just a local thing. And so there's all kinds of questions. Although we've come a long way, there's like 10 times longer way to go in order to even come close to coming up with an idea. So a lot of work still needs to be done.
Madam Chair, can I ask a quick question of Peter? Because you went to this meeting. On page 5, benchmark examples for 4K. It says 11 indoor sports fields, 4 basketball, and 4 futsal? What the heck is an FUTSAL?
Oh, I don't know.
It's indoor soccer, Jim. Played in a certain size and a certain standard.
I've never seen or heard
Very-
such a thing. Sounds
Very
fascinating.
popular.
They play it like in a hockey rink type thing?
I won't bore you with the details, but it's indoor soccer.
I'll Google it. Thanks. Well,
Let's just say, for our friends in the Brazilian community, it's a big deal.
I'll Google it. Thanks. I was kind of curious.
Yep.
That's really
Stay
it.
tuned.
Stay tuned, stay tuned.
More to come.
Any other board member items?
I do, Madam Chair. A couple of things. Tomorrow morning, a group of us are going to go visit the Parker's River Landing Riverwalk Park. And if you want to buy a plank, you can still do that. There's a whole bunch of them left. $350 for an individual, $450 for a nonprofit, and $550 for business, 24 characters. See the young lady to my right, and she can make sure you get it taken care of. It's a great gift for people. And it's pretty amazing. I snuck out there the other day and did a quick walk on my own.
Don't encourage that.
It's not a
active
thing that
construction
people
site.
should be doing, but I've actually figured out you can actually walk a 1-mile loop, including the boardwalk, and so it's going to be pretty cool that way. But so that's the key item that I had this evening. The other thing I wanted to bring up is, and Kathy had alluded to some of it, over the last couple of, actually probably the last week and a half, 2 weeks, I've had conversations with people that have discussed issues that we've touched upon. So I think May 7th meeting, I've had an individual talk to me about the trailers and boats, and I think Kathy's also aware of that. Looking at a bylaw that was put in place in 1971, interestingly enough. So it brings back to my thought process of, and I mentioned this earlier, because I know we don't have anything else to do, so I thought maybe I could give us something to do, but it reminds me that maybe it's time for us to, even if we take one page at a time or something, and start looking at our bylaws and other things that are put in place in 1971 that just don't make sense anymore. And I'm not saying those do or don't, but when I realize that that bylaw was put in place in 1971, it makes me wonder, what else do we have in there that we need or don't need anymore? So maybe somehow, after November, when we catch our breath, we start looking at doing a review of our existing bylaws and where we need to make some, because I know we're going to need to make some changes ultimately when we do some of this. So maybe starting in November, we start taking, Deidre, you do the first 3 pages next meeting. I mean, but the point I'm making is that it's become obvious to me that there are some issues that we need to go back and look at about our bylaws that are basically a living document.
Well, it is an action item.
Yeah, it needs to be, in my opinion, we need to look at rewriting the whole thing.
Oh, gosh, I was trying to give you just a little bit to do, but
Well, I
I'll
think
give you
we've
a
been
lot.
doing that all along, where we've been
Right.
being reactionary, not proactive, and trying to do what we can to make ourselves as attractive as possible with all these optional overlay districts. I think just we need to look at that more clearly and just simplify a lot of the processes and maybe not have so many options for people, because they don't understand it, and it gets confusing. So I guess I don't want to put a lot of effort into doing that when we really should be concentrating on, let's get through all of this and start some of these action items, which are, what grant can we get to hire someone to help us rewrite the zoning bylaw?
Right.
In my opinion. And then also, once we have a certified local comprehensive plan, the whole process of, do we want to look at the growth incentive zone? Do we want to maybe change that up? Because right now it's the 35 motel properties. Are there certain areas we want to give certain things to, and what would be involved with doing all of that? So there's a ton of work that's going to come out of this LCP process of things that we need to do. And I keep mentioning the design standards, I think the architectural site design standards need a complete, burn it in the backyard and start afresh. So there's a lot of things that I think once we should be concentrating on more holistically and not, I realize that we're always going to have reactionary things because some things
And
come
that's
up.
kind of my point, is like, we keep getting sidetracked by having to deal with, the reactionary things, as you referred to it as. So it keeps us from going forward with getting stuff, so maybe chipping away at it might be the answer, I don't know.
The problem is it is a holistic document. You kind of need to look at it all together, so.
Well, let's get through November. I just want to bring it up.
professional help on
I'm
that.
not suggesting we start it now.
That's a lot of work to rewrite the zoning. And I know everyone always wants to talk about looking at form-based code and all that kind of stuff. So those are things that we would all need to think about as we move forward.
I have one item on the CPC committee. We had a committee reorganization, and Judy Wilczynski is now the chair. So she'll be I guess, nominated to the Select Board as the new chair. And we now have three vacancies.
Oh, you do?
Wow.
That's unheard of on CPC.
Well, there's Gary, there's Christine, and not housing. There's one more.
Is it a rep from some other?
Yeah, I think it's,
'Cause I think Gary and is
Gary
Christine
was
from
a-
Open
Well,
Space?
it was
no,
open space.
Christine is open space.
And-
I
and
think Gary was at
large.
large. Judy was at large and will still be.
Okay.
Rec, Debbie is still there. Oh, Drew is from housing. He's the Housing Authority rep. So we have two.
Okay.
I think I appointed Gary to that committee originally, 20-something years ago.
Yeah. We miss him.
Good guy.
Kathy, any further staff updates that you want to share with us?
Yeah, just speaking of committees, Liz Argo is looking at anyone who might be interested in the Public Arts Committee. We're looking to come up with appointees for that. Really looking at different ways and guidelines of facilitating public art on public land. So kind of outside stuff that hopefully can promote tourism and that type of thing and make our town have more of an identity in that type of thing. So if you're interested, fill out a talent bank form for the Public Art Committee.
And I had a few comments from the last week, the workshop, the housing workshop, that was the Select Board and the Community Housing and Affordable Housing Trust. And it was very interesting presentation about 4 ongoing things. The short-term rental study, which sounds very interesting, and it's moving along. And then also about the mixed use that we've spent tonight talking about. Another presentation about Muck, and then finally the RFP that is out for the Housing Authority for that very controversial lot on Forest Road. And that, the proposals are due May 7th, so that will be coming up in our future. And I don't know if, I think basically there was a huge amount of information on all of those issues, and it was really great for me coming in new to learn a lot about them all. So if anyone wants to know about any of the handouts or wants to see them, let me know. I can make some copies.
I think it's also probably included in the packet on the Agenda Center. They do the agenda, and then they usually include
Yeah,
packet information.
That's right.
So yeah.
It was huge. It was the entire.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with the RFP.
It will be very interesting. And that did cause some discussion, very cadence, but people know it's going to be difficult. That's really, the point was made that the 2 key issues on that site are, we've got to protect the drinking water supply. It's right near the wells, and it's just, any proposal will have to deal with that issue, and the stormwater issues that the people in that neighborhood have. And those are 2 key points that came up. And it had, the RFP has already dealt with some of the complaints from that earlier controversy by leaving a good solid buffer of trees in the area that they suggest that the proposals have to deal with. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes in.
Thank you, Deirdre. Upcoming meetings. Next Wednesday, or it might be Monday, it might be a Monday, I don't know. It might be a Monday.
Call
What
back.
day of the week it is.
Wednesday, Joanne.
I don't know what day of the week it is. Kathy and I will be with the Select Board, and anyone who would like to join us on Tuesday, May 6th, that would be great. Then May 7th, we're going to have a pretty full agenda with some new topics.
Yeah, zoning. Yep.
And then May 21st, again, we'll be back with some deliverables from BCS.
Yeah, I think Jeff is hoping to have a discussion on the revised draft of the existing condition section. So,
Anything else that you wanted to add to those meetings, Kath, that we need to?
no, just what I had mentioned before, the 4th is going to be a very busy meeting, June 4th, and then we'll need to have the extra meeting on the 25th.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could I address the 7th meeting? There's been a lot of social media discussion about our May 7th meeting. And I'm not sure what people are expecting, but there's been a call to action, if you will, come to our meeting, come to our meeting.
On the 7th?
On the 7th. Apparently, the town administrator has had a meeting with Mr. Tolley with regards to lobster, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's on our agenda. But I'm concerned that we're going to get a room full of people that are going to expect us to do something, and
We can't.
and that's not what we're going to be able to do. I don't know if it's something we want to say now that, this is what our plan is to do with regards to that, so that we don't have 700 people in here screaming at us to do something that we can't possibly do on Tuesday night.
We can't do anything.
Wednesday night.
Wednesday. See, you got, or whatever day of the week it is.
Do something Tuesday night.
Yeah, we might something do Tuesday night. Just because, it's like the cranberry bog issue. It's been kind of a little bit blown up, and I think people are, I think some people might expect that they're going to come here Tuesday night and talk to the Board of Selectmen and then show up on Wednesday night. See how I covered myself with that? That's pretty good, huh? Expecting us to do something, and I think maybe if we just quickly say now that, nothing's going to be, what we intend to do on Tuesday night might quell some of the next set.
I think it is important to indicate what the process is for any zoning amendment changes. And I think it's also important, let's not go backwards. Let's go forward from here. Determination was made. We're here now. We want to talk about what are you doing, and then what can we do in order to allow something to happen, if that's what the board wants to do. But I think, the main reason this was brought to how the town became aware of it was through the off-premises signage. And I don't, typically, the planning board has limited, obviously, off-premise signs. But we have, for like food trucks, said, you know what? We allow, if you're a food truck, you can have a sandwich board sign out when you're open, so people know. So there's different things that we can talk about, find out what their needs are, but I do think it's important to set expectations, that any zoning changes that happen here is a process. It needs to go through
Zoning.
iteration, right, which I'm sure a lot of people don't know what has to really go into
Really don't.
changing zoning.
Although, if you watch that zoning meeting, they were very direct about what needed to be done. I mean, they really schooled the auditorium that night about, this is what you need to do. This is what, we are limited. We've done what we can do. Here's what you need to do. They were very, was clear as, I mean, the people, if the people wanted to pursue this, here's what you need to do. Here are the options that you have. Our hands are tied at this point. We have.
The ZBA was saying
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, I
Yeah,
see.
we've come to a conclusion. This is all we can do. If you want to pursue this, here's what you need to do. And I thought that was very good, because that was, as you know, a very contentious meeting. But they did a very good job telling the audience what you can do. Here's your recourse. Here's what you can do. I never heard them say, go to the planning board, ever, in that conversation,
I
so.
think that came about from a discussion with the town administrator and the plaintiff.
Okay.
Who ultimately, I mean, the reality of it is, this is where it has to start. If they're going to change any of the zoning bylaws to accommodate him or any other issue that we may have, the process is one of which, step one is to hear the issue and then look for solutions and go through the process, just like we did with ADUs and everything else. We have public hearings, and.
Trucks, we did it with food trucks.
Sure,
It's a
and then
perfect
it comes to
example.
town meeting, and a 2/3 vote at town meeting is going to give you what you want or not. But, you know, I think just by talking about it tonight, I'm hoping there are people there that are watching tonight recognizing that next Wednesday night is not going to give them the immediate solution that they may be thinking for.
Yeah, you're absolutely
It's not that
correct.
we don't want to, it's just that it's not the process and we can't.
Immediate relief.
Madam Chair, I think if you have a very nicely prepared opening statement to start that meeting, that will just take the temperature from wherever it might be. I have no idea what it's gonna be like, but if you can just set the tone, maybe you and Kathy could establish right up front, this is who we are, this is what we are, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. And then maybe just everything will just kind of go like this. That is my 2 cents, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, I think
My thoughts exactly.
hearing loud and clear, and my thoughts as well, it's important to be very clear about what the expectations need to be for the outcome of that meeting, so.
And while acknowledging that we appreciate that people are passionate and involved, or just at the very least involved, right?
Right.
Which is something that
And-
all of us who work on these committees wonder, like, is anybody watching? Is anybody listening?
Well, that's
And
like,
is it participating?
you're going right where I was going to go. We're-
Oh, sorry.
We initiated this, the town initiated this to listen, to find out more about what the particular needs of this person and maybe this industry, which is important to our town, and how we can help them in a logical, reasonable way. The last thing we want is a petition article. And we know sometimes that's how these things wind up. And petition articles are typically problematic, so.
And emotional.
And that's why we want to make this outreach, and why the town administrator has made this outreach, so that we can listen to what the needs are, and then make a plan to how we can help them.
Long-term.
Yeah.
Long-term, right.
Anything
My
else?
2 cents,
No,
Madam
that's
Chair.
okay. I'm glad you brought it up.
That's good to know,
I'm
too.
glad you brought it up. Thank you. So may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Peter?
Aye.
He wants to stay.
Thank you. Goodbye.